Welcome back to another story on Arcane Paradox. This time, we're bringing you, what if Fawkes chose Harry at age 6 and Phoenix Fire destroyed 31 bindings placed by Dumbledore since he was 1. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1. Ember. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like old shoes and mouse droppings and the particular kind of damp that seeps into wood when nobody cares enough to fix it. Harry Potter had lived in it for as long as he could remember, which wasn't very long, because most of his memories had a way of sliding off before he could hold them properly. He'd always assumed that was normal. The way some kids just couldn't catch a ball, maybe he just couldn't catch time. He was 6 years old today. He knew this because Aunt Petunia had said, tight-lipped, while slamming a plate of burnt toast onto the kitchen table that morning, "Don't think your birthday means anything special in this house." Which meant it was his birthday, and nothing special was going to happen, and the toast was burnt because she'd been thinking about him instead of watching the grill. Dudley was having a birthday party next week. There would be a bouncy castle. Harry ate the burnt toast and didn't say anything, which was the only response the Dursleys had ever taught him to have. He scraped the black bits off with his thumbnail and ate the pale bread underneath, and he watched a spider work its way across the window above the sink, and he thought about nothing in particular because thinking about particular things had a way of making his chest hurt. By mid-morning he was back in the cupboard. He'd been sent there for looking at Dudley funny, which wasn't really a rule Harry had broken so much as a condition of existing near Dudley at all. Harry had a face that apparently just looked funny at things. He sat on his cot with his knees pulled up and his back against the wall, listening to Dudley thunder back and forth across the floor above him. The cupboard was dark except for a thin line of light under the door. Harry had learned to see in the dark the way some kids learn to swim, not from being taught, but from having no choice. He didn't know why, but today the dark felt different. Heavier, somehow. Like something in the air had gone very quiet and was waiting. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. The plaster was cold and slightly gritty. He did this sometimes, pressed his hand to walls or floors or the ground in the garden, without knowing why. It helped with the heavy feeling. It was like the world was humming just below the frequency he could hear, and if he pressed hard enough against something solid, he could feel the hum in his bones instead of just feel wrong without knowing what was wrong. Today, when he pressed his palm flat, the wall hummed back. Harry stared at the dark. His hand didn't move. The hum wasn't sound and it wasn't heat and it wasn't quite feeling either, but it was all three of those things at once, radiating up through his palm and into his wrist and settling somewhere in the center of his chest like a coal that had just caught. Then the light under the door changed. It went from the pale gray yellow of a cloudy English morning to something warm and deep, the color of a candle flame seen through closed eyelids. Harry stared at it. He heard no footsteps. Heard no voices. Just the sound of the television in the sitting room being very loud about a game show, and beneath that, much closer, the quiet crackle of something that shouldn't have been there. The cupboard door opened. Harry had not touched the latch. The light that came in wasn't from the hallway. It came from the bird. It stood on the hallway floor just outside the cupboard, and it was the most extraordinarily alive thing Harry had ever seen. Not just alive the way pigeons were alive, twitching and mechanical. Alive the way fire is alive, purposeful and aware and impossible to look away from. It was red and gold and its feathers moved even when it didn't, the way flames move even when the fire isn't spreading, just existing in that constant conversation between heat and air. Its eyes were the deep amber of autumn leaves held up to sunlight, and they were fixed entirely on Harry. It made a sound. Not a squawk and not a whistle, something between a note and a word, something that landed behind Harry's sternum and resonated there the way a tuning fork resonates against a table. Harry looked at the bird. The bird looked at Harry. This lasted about 4 seconds. Then it walked into the cupboard, stepped neatly over Harry's one broken trainer, and landed on his knee. It weighed almost nothing. Its talons were warm, not the sharp cold of a normal bird's feet, but warm the way a cupped hand is warm. Harry could feel its heartbeat through his kneecap, rapid and steady and immensely strong, like a drum played by someone who has never been afraid of sound. "Hello," Harry said, because it seemed rude not to. The bird tilted its head. The note it made this time was quieter, almost conversational, and it went directly into the cool warm place in Harry's chest and sat there. Then it sang. Not long. Not loudly. Just a phrase, 7 or 8 notes, and Harry's whole body went rigid as if he'd touched a live wire, except it wasn't pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was the sudden violent removal of something he'd become so accustomed to that he'd stopped knowing it was there, the way you stop noticing a ringing in your ears until it stops, and in the silence you realize how loud it had been. The first binding came apart. Harry didn't have words for it. He was 6. But he felt it, a thread snapping somewhere behind his left eye, and with it the dissolving of a fog he hadn't known was fog. Memory came back like water finding the path of least resistance, nothing dramatic, just suddenly there. His mother's face, red-haired and laughing, clearer than it had ever been. The color of the sitting room in a house he'd lived in before this house. The feeling of being held by someone who meant it. He gasped. His hands gripped the edge of his cot. The bird sang again. The second binding went. The third. They came apart in clusters after that, some alone and some in groups of 2 or 3, each one releasing something different, heat, clarity, a sudden expansion of space in his own mind like a room whose walls have been pushed back. He felt them go and felt what had been under them, and each time what had been under them was more light, more depth, more of himself that had been folded away without his knowledge or consent. By the time the bird reached what must have been the 10th or 11th, Harry was shaking. Not from fear. From the effort of holding all of himself at once, when 30 seconds ago he'd only had a fraction to work with. By the 15th, his eyes were wet, though he couldn't have said why. By the 25th, the air in the cupboard had changed completely. It was warm now, the deep orange warm of an open fire on a winter night, and the wallpaper, old, peeling, stained with decades of deathly damp, had begun to char very slightly at the edges without catching. The light under the door had gone dark. The light inside the cupboard was coming from the bird and from Harry's hands, which were glowing, gently, amber and white. Harry stared at his hands. He wasn't scared. That was the thing, he should have been scared, he thought, but there was no room for it. Every space that fear might have filled had been occupied by something cleaner and older and far more difficult to name. The bird sang the last phrase. 31 bindings, and the last one was the deepest, set so early that it had grown into the foundation of everything else like a root under pavement. When it went, Harry felt a sound more than heard it, a crack, deep and structural, like ice breaking on a lake in spring. And in the space where the binding had been was something that blazed up hot and immediate and huge, something that filled his chest and his hands and the back of his skull, something that pressed against the inside of his skin the way water presses against the walls of a glass that is too small for it. The wallpaper stopped charring. The glow in his hands faded slowly to nothing. Harry sat in the dark and the warmth with a phoenix on his knee and his whole self rearranged, and he breathed. He breathed for a long time. The bird waited with the patience of something that had outlived centuries and found the process restful rather than tedious. Finally, Harry said, "He put them there, didn't he?" It wasn't quite a question. There was a specific feeling that comes with the returning of stolen things, and Harry had enough of himself back now to recognize it for what it was. The old man. The one in the paintings. He didn't have a name for Dumbledore yet. He had a face, silver-bearded, half-moon spectacles, the particular quality of presence that belongs to people who have spent their whole lives being the most important person in the room. He had the memory of that face bending over him in a cold dark, the words, "for the greater good," spoken in the tone of someone who has already decided the argument, and then the press of a wand against his forehead and the going away of things. The phoenix made a sound that was neither agreement nor denial. It was more like acknowledgement, the sound of something said being genuinely heard. "Why did you come here?" Harry asked. He wasn't suspicious. He was genuinely curious, with the clear and direct curiosity of a child who has just had the part of him that knew how to be curious returned. The bird looked at him with those amber eyes and sang one quiet note, and Harry understood, not in words but in the way you understand warmth, it had chosen him. Whatever that meant for a phoenix, it meant something total. It wasn't a provisional arrangement. It wasn't subject to the approval of someone else. "Okay," Harry said. "Do you have a name?" It sang two syllables that were also the sound of a small fire beginning, and somehow Harry knew to hear them as Fawkes. "Fawkes," he said, and felt the name settle. "Okay." He looked at the thin line of television sound coming under the door, Dudley laughing at something, Uncle Vernon's low rumble. He looked at his one working trainer and his 3 books, 2 of which were Dudley's cast-offs and one of which he'd found in the bin outside a charity shop. He looked at the wall where he'd been pressing his palm, where the plaster had gone slightly warm. Something had changed. Not the cupboard was exactly as moldy and damp and small as it had always been. But his relationship to it had changed entirely, the way the same piece of music sounds completely different once you understand what key it's in. He wasn't smaller than the cupboard anymore. The cupboard was smaller than him. It always had been. Someone had just worked very hard to make sure he didn't know that. He got up, which disturbed Fawkes briefly, who launched from his knee with a sound like a single bright chord and settled on top of the cupboard door above him. Harry smoothed down his oversized shirt, Dudley's cast-off, 3 sizes wrong, and put his hand on the latch. His heart was very steady. That was the thing that surprised him most. He would have expected, had he thought about it, that having 31 magical constraints removed all at once would leave him feeling raw and wild and out of control. Instead he felt precise. Like a compass needle after it's been knocked around for a while, finally finding north. Like a lens that has been wiped clean. He opened the door and walked out. The hallway of number 4, Privet Drive was exactly as beige and aggressively normal as always. The framed photos of Dudley at various sizes lined the wall, Dudley on a swing, Dudley holding an ice cream, Dudley at the seaside looking like a pink balloon with features drawn on. Harry walked past them without hurrying and into the kitchen. Aunt Petunia was at the counter cutting vegetables with the focused violence she applied to all food preparation. She heard him come in and said, without turning, "Get back in your cupboard. You're not to come out until dinner." "I want to go to the library," Harry said. Petunia turned around. This was already different from the usual exchange, which involved more or less 0 requests and a great deal of compliance. She looked at him with her narrow horse face pulled into its default expression of mild revulsion, and something else moved across it, something uncertain, the way a person looks when they're sure they've walked into the right room but everything in it is slightly wrong. "What did you say?" "The library," Harry said. "On Magnolia Road. I want to go. I can walk there by myself, I know the way." "You are not going to the library," Petunia said, with the flat certainty of someone who has never had to justify a rule in their life. "Why not?" The vegetable knife went down on the counter with a click. "Because I said so." Harry looked at her. He wasn't angry. He was curious in a way that was almost clinical, watching the mechanics of the conversation, testing the architecture. He'd spent 6 years accepting these walls. He'd now spent approximately 4 minutes knowing they were walls and not the actual shape of the world. "That's not a reason," he said. Petunia's face went the particular shade of red that meant she was approaching a version of herself that broke things. "You will go back to your cupboard this instant or so help me, boy, I'm not afraid of you," Harry said. He said it simply, the way you state a fact about weather. Not defiantly, not with any particular heat. He said it because it was true and because he had just spent 6 years being afraid of her and it seemed important to be clear, between them, that that period was over. Petunia stared at him. The vegetable knife sat forgotten. Behind Harry, the hallway was very quiet, and then from the top of the cupboard Fawkes dropped down silently and landed on Harry's shoulder, and the kitchen was lit, just briefly, with that deep warm amber light. Petunia made a sound like a tea kettle just before it screams. Harry turned calmly and walked to the front door. The sound of Harry's trainers on the front path, and then the click of the gate, and then Magnolia Road. He stood on the pavement in the thin English summer sunlight and breathed the outside air and looked up and down the street with its identical houses and its identical cars and its identical driveways, and he felt the vastness of everything he didn't know pressing against him from all sides, enormous and exciting and not remotely frightening. Fawkes shifted on his shoulder, wings briefly extended for balance, and then folded them neat and settled like a man finding his chair. "Let's go," Harry said, and went. 312 miles north, in a circular office at the top of a tower, Albus Dumbledore was in the middle of writing a letter when his hand stopped moving. He sat very still for a moment. Then he set down his quill with the careful precision of a man who is managing his own response to something, and he looked at the perch in the corner of his office where Fawkes was not sitting. He had known, in the abstract, that this was possible. That one day Fawkes might. Phoenixes were not owned, were not kept, they chose their companions and unchose them when the soul they bonded to moved in directions they could not follow. He'd told himself, over the years, that he and Fawkes were in agreement. That the old bird understood necessity the way Dumbledore did, the terrible arithmetic of the greater good, the need to sacrifice small pains for large salvations. He'd been telling himself that for 5 years, 4 months, and 11 days. He sat at his desk and the portraits of the former headmasters slept deliberately, as they always did when something was happening that they'd all agreed not to officially witness. The sorting hat was motionless on its shelf. The various silver instruments that monitored various magical situations around the castle ticked and whirred, and one of them, in the far left corner, one that monitored the magical welfare of a specific child in a specific address in Surrey, had gone completely silent. Not gone offline. Gone silent the way a bell goes silent after it's been struck, the kind of silence that follows from sound, full of the memory of noise. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. He looked at the silent instrument. Then he closed his eyes, and for a long moment, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore allowed himself to feel the specific weight of a very old mistake sitting down in the room with him. When he opened his eyes, they were very bright behind the half-moon glasses, and he picked up his quill, and he began to write a different letter from the one he'd been writing. His hand was perfectly steady, because Dumbledore's hands were always perfectly steady, and he did not allow them to be anything else, and that was part of the problem. Harry spent 4 hours at the library. The librarian, Mrs. Figg's neighbor Mrs. Odell, was a stout woman with reading glasses that had a chain of blue beads, and she had the slightly dazed expression of someone who had not expected a small boy in an oversized shirt to walk in alone and immediately request books on basic chemistry, the history of Britain before the Normans, and anything she had on birds of prey. "Are you here with an adult?" she'd asked. "No," Harry said. "How old are you?" "6 today." Mrs. Odell had blinked at him over the blue bead glasses. "Shouldn't you be having a party?" Harry had thought about this. "Probably," he'd said. "Can I have the books, please?" He read with the focused intensity of someone who has been hungry for a very long time and has just discovered that the locked room they've been living next to was full of food. He wasn't interested in the children's picture books with the bright covers near the entrance. He went straight for the general section and pulled down things that interested him, which covered a wide range, and he sat at a table by the window with Fawkes perched on the back of his chair, which Mrs. Odell had viewed with some alarm but ultimately said nothing about, having made a quick calculation about which of her available battles was worth fighting, and he read. He didn't fully understand everything. He wasn't supposed to at 6. But he understood more than he should have, more than the bindings had allowed him to, and he could feel that understanding opening up and stretching like a waking animal, greedy for more. He read about birds and found a page on phoenixes that said they were mythological, which he found funny in a way he couldn't have explained given that there was a mythological bird currently working its way through a bowl of water on the table beside him. He read about chemistry and decided he wanted to do more of that. He read about the history of the Celts and felt, vaguely and distantly, that he was looking at a photograph of a distant relative. Something in his own story was wound through this older story, though he couldn't see the thread yet. He was, for the first time in his life, genuinely happy. Not the grey absence of unhappiness that he'd sometimes achieved by being very quiet and very small and not attracting attention. Actually happy, with the particular quality that belongs to a mind that has been freed from constraint and set loose on a world full of interesting things. He walked home in the late afternoon when the light was going gold and the shadows were long and thin across the pavement. He was stopped twice, once by old Mrs. Figg who appeared around her garden wall with a face full of barely suppressed alarm, and once by a man in a patched suit who was pretending to read a newspaper on a bench near Magnolia Road but whose eyes kept sliding toward Harry with an expression of professional concern. Harry looked at the man on the bench as he walked past. The man looked back with the newspaper held at an angle that was completely unconvincing. "I can see you watching me," Harry said, not stopping walking. The man's newspaper rattled. Harry walked on. Fawkes made a sound that was almost certainly amusement. When he got back to Privet Drive, Uncle Vernon's car was in the driveway, which meant the evening was going to be more complex. Harry walked up the front path and let himself in and found the Dursleys in the kitchen, the three of them in a tight configuration that spoke of a conversation that had just hastily ended. Vernon turned around with the color of a man who has been working himself up to something for the last 3 hours. He was red from collar to hairline, and his mustache was vibrating slightly, which was never a good sign. "Sit down," he said, pointing at the chair. Harry sat. Not because he was told to. Because he wasn't interested in having the argument standing up. Vernon looked at Fawkes on Harry's shoulder. Vernon had a complicated relationship with things he didn't understand. His default response was to pretend they didn't exist until they became impossible to ignore, at which point he bullied them. The Phoenix was presenting him with a real challenge to this approach. That bird," he started. "His name is Fawkes," Harry said. "I don't care what its name is, it's a—" Vernon stopped, because describing what exactly Fawkes was presented certain linguistic difficulties when you were a man who had spent 20 years enforcing the non-existence of magic. "It can't stay here." "He stays," Harry said. "Now you listen here, Uncle Vernon," Harry said, and something in his voice stopped the larger man mid-sentence. It wasn't volume. It wasn't menace. It was a quality of certainty so complete that it functioned like a physical barrier. You could throw yourself against it if you wanted, but it wasn't going to move. "I went to the library today. I'm going to go again tomorrow. I'm going to need more books than I have, and I'm going to need the money for them, and Fawkes is going to stay on my shoulder or in my room or wherever he wants to be. These things are going to happen." The kitchen was very quiet. Dudley had gone absolutely still in the way he went still when something happened that his usual playbook didn't cover. Petunia said, in a voice that was very carefully controlled, "You can't talk to your uncle like that." "I can and I did," Harry said, not unkindly. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just telling you how it is." Vernon's face was doing something remarkable, cycling through fury, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably close to fear, the way faces sometimes do when they encounter something they've been trying very hard to pretend doesn't exist. Harry looked at his aunt. "I know you know about magic," he said. "I know you know what I am. I don't know all of it yet, but I know that much." He watched her go rigid. "I'm not angry about it. I'm just telling you that I'm aware. We can do this the easy way or the complicated way. The easy way is that I have my books and I'm left alone. The complicated way would involve me asking questions very loudly in front of the neighbors." Petunia's face had gone white as bone. Her hands were flat on the table and they were shaking, very slightly, at the wrists. "You wouldn't," she said. "Try me," Harry said, pleasantly. Later, after dinner, which he ate at the table, not in the cupboard, Harry lay in the dark in the cupboard, which remained his sleeping situation for now because there were only so many battles to fight on one day, and he stared at the dark ceiling and thought. Fawkes was curled in the corner of the cot, warm and steady, his breathing slow and even, and in the orange warmth of the bird's presence, Harry thought about the man in the half-moon glasses and the 31 things that had been done to him, and the 31 things that had come undone. He wasn't furious. He was something quieter and more sustainable than furious. He was clear-eyed about it, the way you can be clear-eyed about damage when you're out of the burning building. The building burned, that happened, you can see the blackened beams very calmly from where you're standing in the cool air outside. He filed away the clarity and the questions and the anger and the way Petunia had looked when he said I know you know, filed all of it carefully in a mind that was finally the right size to hold things, and then he went to sleep. He slept better than he had ever slept in his life, deep and still, with no nightmares and no gray half-waking, just darkness and warmth and the sound of a phoenix breathing. In the morning he would go back to the library. He had a lot of catching up to do. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at number 4, Privet Drive. Not for Harry, not yet. This one was addressed to Vernon Dursley, in green ink, on cream parchment, with a seal that made the postman handle it gingerly without knowing why. Vernon read it in the kitchen while Harry ate cereal at the table and Fawkes watched from the back of Harry's chair. Vernon's face went through 4 distinct colors. Then he put the letter in his trouser pocket and said nothing, which was itself a kind of information. Harry watched this and said nothing. He was patient now in the way he had not been patient before, not the hollow patience of someone with nowhere to go, but the real kind, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and being willing to let other people catch up in their own time. He poured another bowl of cereal and thought about what he'd read in the library yesterday, which was a general survey of European mythological traditions that had been, he was now fairly certain, drawing on memories of real events rather than inventing them from scratch. He thought about phoenixes, and fire, and the particular quality of magic that he'd felt like a hum in the walls since he was small and which he could now feel as clearly as sunlight on skin. He thought about the 31 things that had been taken from him, and what else might have been taken that hadn't come back yet. He thought about the half-moon glasses and the voice that said for the greater good, and somewhere in his chest, the small coal-bright thing that Fawkes had lit on his birthday burned steady and constant. He had time. He had a bird that chose him. He had a mind that was finally his own. That was enough to start with. Chapter 2, Ash and Letters. The summer Harry turned 7, he learned 3 things that mattered. The first was that magic had rules. Not laws in the way Vernon Dursley understood laws, not things written in books that you followed because someone with more power than you would punish you if you didn't. Rules the way physics has rules, the way water has rules, the way fire has rules. Magic was a language the universe spoke, and like any language it had grammar, and the grammar was consistent whether you knew it or not. Harry had been doing accidental magic for years, bits and pieces that got him in trouble and that he'd never been able to control. Now, with the fog gone, he could feel the difference between magic happening to him and magic happening from him. The first was like a sneeze. The second was like reaching. He practiced reaching. He started small, nudging a cup across the table, asking the garden's overgrown hedges to grow in a particular direction, convincing a stuck window latch to give. Not with wand movements or spoken words, though he understood from his library books that those were the standard tools. Without them, just with the clear internal sense of this is what I want and this is how much of myself I'm willing to put behind it. It worked more often than not. When it didn't work, he thought about why, and then he tried again. The second thing he learned was that the man in the half-moon glasses had not stopped moving just because Harry had. Mrs. Figg was a spy. Harry had suspected this since the day after his birthday when she'd appeared around her garden wall with that barely suppressed alarm. He liked Mrs. Figg despite this, she was genuinely kind about cats and genuinely bad at subterfuge, which was an endearing combination. He didn't confront her about it because it wasn't her fault she'd been recruited, and also because there was a certain value in letting people think their surveillance was working. The man on the bench with the newspaper was a different story. His name was Mundungus Fletcher, which Harry discovered by following him once to the pub on the high street and listening to the barman call it across the room. Mundungus was a comically bad tale who smelled of pipe smoke and something like burned caramel and who clearly found the whole assignment deeply beneath him. Harry waved at him from across the street one morning, pleasantly, and the man had nearly fallen off his bench. He let Mundungus watch. The information going back to Dumbledore was going to be interesting, and Harry was curious what the old man would do with it. The third thing, the thing that mattered most, in the long run, was Neville. He met Neville Longbottom at the library on a Tuesday in August, 2 months after his birthday, when Neville was 7½ and had been brought to the library by his grandmother Augusta, who had deposited him at the children's section with instructions to read something improving and then gone off to discuss something with the reference librarian in the tone of a woman who was accustomed to having discussions become conclusions. Neville was in the children's section looking at a book about toads with the expression of someone who has found, unexpectedly, a picture of something they love in a place they didn't expect to find it. Harry was not in the children's section. He was 2 rows over in the general natural history section, and he'd come around the end of the shelf for the 3rd volume of a series on migratory birds and found Neville standing there with the toad book. They looked at each other. Fawkes, on Harry's shoulder, looked at Neville with those amber eyes. Neville looked at Fawkes. His expression went from startled to transfixed in about half a second. "What kind of bird is that?" he said. "Phoenix," Harry said. Neville looked at this with the very specific expression of a child who already knows that the world contains real magic and has been told to pretend that it doesn't. "Oh," he said. "Right. Then, after a pause, I'm not supposed to say that I know what those are." "I know," Harry said. "It's all right. I'm not supposed to know about any of this either." Neville blinked. Then he looked at Harry with a careful assessment that was more adult than his round face suggested he was capable of. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "Yes. My gran talks about you sometimes." "Not to me. To people she thinks I'm not listening to." "What does she say?" Neville thought about this with the scrupulous honesty of someone who doesn't see the point of softening things. "That you're important. That a lot depends on you. That it's a shame about where you ended up." He paused. "I don't know what that means." "It means they put me with my aunt and uncle," Harry said. "It's not that bad." Which wasn't entirely true and wasn't entirely false. The Dursleys had been considerably more manageable since his birthday, the dynamic between them recalibrated by a single conversation in the kitchen and the constant visible presence of a bird that made Petunia's eye twitch every time she looked at it. "I live with my gran," Neville said, in the tone of someone matching information. "My parents they're in St. Mungo's. They got hurt." Harry looked at him. "I'm sorry." Neville shrugged with the particular heaviness of a child who has been carrying something a long time. "It's all right. I mean, it's not. But I'm used to it." Then, as if deciding that topic was done, he held up the toad book. "Do you know anything about toads?" "Some," Harry said. "Not as much as birds." He nodded at the shelf. "There's a better one on amphibians 2 shelves down. Has a whole chapter on fire-bellied toads." Neville's face did something immediate and hopeful. "Fire-bellied toads? Colored to warn predators. The pattern's different on every one, like fingerprints." They went to find the amphibian book, and Neville's grandmother found them 40 minutes later at a table covered in books about various cold-blooded creatures, deep in an argument about whether salamanders counted as fire creatures or water creatures based on the source material, and she stood in the aisle and looked at Harry Potter, at the well-read, clear-eyed boy with a phoenix on his shoulder who had somehow in 40 minutes drawn her grandson out further than she'd managed in months. And something moved across Augusta Longbottom's formidable face that was not quite surprise and not quite grief and not quite hope but was some compressed version of all 3. She said nothing about any of it. She checked out Neville's books and took him home. But the next Tuesday she brought him back, and she said nothing about Harry, and Harry said nothing about her, and they both understood that an arrangement had been made. The years between 6 and 11 had a rhythm. Library on Tuesdays and Thursdays with Neville when school wasn't in session. School itself, which was tedious in a way that was different from how it had been before, it had been tedious because he couldn't concentrate, the fog making everything flat and slippery. Now it was tedious because he was frequently 3 chapters ahead of wherever the class was, and the teachers didn't know what to do with him. He learned to be less visibly ahead, not out of fear of standing out but out of boredom, if you let on you knew everything the teacher was going to say, they either got flustered or started calling on you constantly, and neither of those was more interesting than the alternative. He got into a school once, a slightly better one, in the next catchment over, that had a science room with an actual functioning microscope, by writing a letter to the admissions board that Petunia would not have approved of if she'd read it, which she hadn't, because Harry mailed it himself. He attended for 2 terms before the school quietly suggested that he might be better served by a more advanced program, which was their way of saying that he'd explained 3 conceptual errors in the Year 9 biology curriculum to his Year 3 teacher, and the resulting conversation had been awkward for everyone. Petunia had received this news with the expression of someone who simultaneously wanted to be furious and was secretly, unwillingly impressed. She did not say anything about the impression. She said quite a lot about the fury. The Dursleys' relationship with Harry had evolved into something that didn't have a clean name. Not warmth. Warmth would require dismantling things that had calcified too long ago. More like a kind of wary equilibrium. They had stopped sending him to the cupboard, not because they'd had a change of heart but because it had become apparent that Harry was going to get up and leave anyway, and having him leave was less controllable than having him present. He'd been moved into Dudley's second bedroom sometime around his 7th birthday, less as a gift than as an admission of practical reality. Vernon sometimes looked at him across the dinner table with the expression of a man who has lost a negotiation he didn't fully understand and is still working out exactly when it happened. Dudley was a different case. Dudley was not, Harry had concluded, fundamentally unkind so much as he was fundamentally unexamined. His cruelty had always been the cruelty of a boy who'd never had to think about other people because everyone around him made sure he didn't have to. Harry had not tried to befriend him and had not been cruel to him in return, and the result was a sort of cautious curiosity on Dudley's part that occasionally manifested as him sitting in the doorway of Harry's room and asking questions about whatever Harry was reading. Fawkes was the strangest part of this. Dudley was terrified of the Phoenix for the first year, and then slowly, incrementally, became fascinated. The morning Harry walked into the kitchen and found Dudley standing at the counter very carefully offering Fawkes a piece of toast with the expression of a boy defusing something he knew was probably safe but wasn't quite sure, Harry had said nothing, just poured himself a glass of water and watched, and Fawkes had taken the toast with great dignity, and something shifted between Harry and his cousin that wasn't friendship but was at least the beginning of something honest. Magic grew with him. Not in a dramatic escalating power level way but in the way a language grows, more vocabulary, more nuance, more facility with the underlying structure. He could feel its edges expanding and its center deepening and the places where it connected with the hum of the world around him becoming more articulate. He never got a wand. He didn't need one yet. The wandless magic he practiced wasn't flashy but it was precise, and precision, he was increasingly convinced, mattered more than power. He found, in the library at 11, a book that had been incorrectly shelved in the general mythology section instead of the children's fantasy section, and which turned out to be a thinly veiled popular history of magical Britain written by someone who clearly hadn't disguised it very well. He read it in 2 sittings and confirmed several things he'd suspected, added a dozen more questions to the list he kept in his head, and put the book back exactly where he'd found it. He knew about Voldemort. He knew about the prophecy. Not its exact text, but the existence of it, the shape of it, the way it had cast a shadow over his life before he was old enough to walk. He'd found pieces of the story in Mrs. Figg's accidental references, in Neville's grandmother's carefully incomplete accounts, in the gaps in things people said when they thought he wasn't fully following. He thought about it the way you think about a game you know the rules of but haven't played yet. The pieces were visible. The board was visible. The only question was how you wanted to play. He did not lie awake worrying about it. Voldemort was disembodied, probably not gone, probably coming back, probably his problem eventually. That was a lot of probablys. He had things to read in the meantime. What he thought about more was Dumbledore. He thought about Dumbledore the way you think about a chess problem that has a solution you haven't found yet, not with hostility, not with fear, but with the focused patience of someone who knows the answer is there and is going to find it. He understood, at 7, at 8, at 9, with increasing clarity, the shape of what had been done to him and why. He had 31 pieces of evidence, each one the ghost of a binding that had been removed, each one carrying the residue of intent. Some of them were protective, he could feel that, the way you can feel the intention behind a thing even after the thing is gone. But protection layered that thickly over a person wasn't protection anymore. It was something else. He didn't hate the old man. He was profoundly uninterested in hating the old man. What he was interested in was the conversation they were eventually going to have, and being ready for it. He wrote, when he was 9, a short list in his notebook. He used it as a bookmark. It said, things Dumbledore will say. Things he expects me to say back. Things I'm actually going to say instead. The first 2 columns were detailed and specific. The third was short and precise. He revised it every few months as he learned more about the man and his methods. He was not, in any of this, a cold child. He was warm, with Neville, with Fawkes, with the library staff who'd come to know him, with the woman at the newsagents who saved him interesting magazines. He laughed easily and argued enthusiastically and cared about things with an unguarded directness that sometimes surprised people who expected a famous orphan to be either tragic or distant. He was neither. He was just himself, which was something that had been prevented from happening for 5 years, and which he now pursued with the energy of someone making up for lost time. Neville, at 10, told Harry that his gran had started leaving copies of the Daily Prophet on the table in the mornings, which she hadn't done before. There are articles, Neville said, at their usual table in the library, his toad Trevor sitting in a bowl of water between the books. About magical things. She folds the page so that particular bits are facing up. What bits? Things about, Neville lowered his voice, which was unnecessary because the nearest person was 3 shelves away and deeply invested in regional railway timetables. Things about Hogwarts. About the letters. About who's going this year. Harry nodded. We'll both be getting letters soon. You think? I'm 11 in July. You're 11 in July too. He paused. Well, you're July 30th. You know my birthday. Your gran mentioned it. Once, when she thought you were in the bathroom and I wasn't paying attention. Harry looked at him. It's interesting, actually. The prophecy, the one about me. It says July. Could have been about either of us. Neville went very still. He knew about the prophecy too, his grandmother's carefully averted eyes had told Harry that much, months ago. Gran doesn't talk about that. No. But you know it exists. A pause. Yes. Harry nodded. He didn't make anything of it, didn't load it with the weight it probably deserved. Doesn't matter, in the end. We both have the summer. We should probably learn a few more things before we get on a train to Scotland. Neville looked at him with the expression he sometimes got, a mixture of reassurance and faint bewilderment, as if the world kept being less frightening than he'd braced himself for. Right, he said. Okay. Tell your gran I said her sourcing method is obvious but I appreciate the thought, Harry said, and opened the next book. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a bright Tuesday morning in July, 3 days before Harry's 11th birthday. He'd been expecting it, not the exact day but the general period, and so he wasn't surprised by the letter itself. He was mildly surprised by how many of them came. It started with one, dropped through the letterbox in the normal way, and Harry had it in his hand and read before Uncle Vernon had finished his second piece of toast. Then 2 more came, one through the kitchen window and one down the chimney, which caused a tremendous amount of noise and got soot on the hearthrug. By the time Vernon was upright and shouting, there were 6 letters in Harry's hand, 4 more on the table, and Fawkes was observing the proceedings with the composed amusement of someone at a very good party. Right, Harry said to the room in general. I've got it. He collected all 10, neat stack, and took them upstairs. The letter was exactly what he'd expected, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, September 1st, the list of required materials, the train information, Dumbledore's name at the bottom. He read it once, set it on the desk, and sat on the bed and thought. He'd been preparing for this for 4 years. Not in the anxious way, not with the feeling of a deadline approaching. More in the way you prepare for something you're genuinely looking forward to, steadily, with pleasure, making sure you know what you're walking into. He knew what he was walking into. A castle full of magic and teenagers and ancient traditions, and a headmaster who was both magnificent and deeply compromised. A defense teacher who was reportedly ill and kept replacing himself. A stone corridor on the 3rd floor that you were apparently not to visit because something important was hidden there. He knew about the Philosopher's Stone. He'd worked this out through a fairly logical chain of inference involving Gringotts, a newspaper article from the previous year about a break-in, a library book on Nicholas Flamel that had been very briefly on the shelves before being removed, and the particular quality of Dumbledore's public-facing concern about Voldemort that suggested the man was simultaneously worried about Voldemort finding something and confident that the thing was protected in a place Voldemort couldn't easily access. The stone was going to be at Hogwarts. Voldemort was going to try to get to it. These things were going to happen, and they were going to involve Harry, and the question was simply how. He opened his notebook and revised column 3. Hagrid arrived on Harry's birthday, which was a Saturday, at 9:30 in the morning, announced by a knock on the front door that was more of a percussion event than a knock. Harry came downstairs in his socks and opened the door before anyone else could get to it, and found the largest human being he had ever seen filling the doorframe with his entire considerable self. Rubeus Hagrid was 6 feet and 4 inches of warm, overwhelmed feeling. He had a beard like a friendly hedge and eyes like a very kind animal, and he was looking at Harry with an expression of such immediate and genuine emotion that Harry felt, in the first second, something uncomplicate itself in the middle of his chest. This man had known his parents. Not as footnotes, not as a legend. Had actually known them, liked them, remembered them. Harry, Hagrid said, in a voice like gravel in a warm bucket. Blimey. Look at ya. Hello, Harry said. You must be Hagrid. Come in. Hagrid came in sideways and knocked a picture off the wall and apologized to it. Harry led him to the kitchen, where Hagrid took up approximately half the available space, sat on a chair that made an alarming sound, and produced a cake from somewhere inside his coat. It was pink and slightly lopsided and said "Happy Birthday Harry" in green icing. Harry looked at the cake. Something in the back of his throat did something inconvenient, which he managed by not looking at it for a moment and looking at Fawkes instead, who had settled on top of the refrigerator with the dignified air of a creature who understands that some moments belong to humans. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. Hagrid was watching Fawkes with an expression of enormous and complicated awe. Is that Fawkes?" "Dumbledore's, my phoenix," Harry said pleasantly. Hagrid opened and closed his very large mouth twice. "Right," he managed. "Yes. Right." He shook himself like a large friendly dog. "We need to talk about Hogwarts." "I know," Harry said. He sat down across from Hagrid and poured them both tea. "I got the letter. What I need is someone to take me to Diagon Alley to get my things." Yes, exactly, that's exactly what I'm here for." Hagrid beamed. Then something in Harry's face, the clear, calm certainty of it, seemed to register, and the beam became something more uncertain. "You already knew I was comin'." "I expected someone would come. I hoped it would be you." Harry handed him the tea. "Hagrid, did you know my parents well?" Hagrid set down the tea with a hand that was slightly unsteady. Yeah, Harry. Yeah, I did. Your mum and dad, they were, your dad, James, he was one of the most decent people I ever knew. Bit mad, bit reckless, but decent all the way through. And your mum." He stopped and looked at the table and then back up. "Your mum, Lily, she was something else entirely. Brightest which I ever met, and that's saying something given I've been at Hogwarts a long time." Harry sat with that for a moment, turning it over carefully, and then asked 3 specific questions about his parents that he'd been keeping for a person who actually knew them, and Hagrid answered all 3 with the immediate, unguarded warmth of someone who'd been waiting to be asked and hadn't been sure the asking would ever come. By the end of it Hagrid's eyes were suspiciously bright and Harry's were doing their own inconvenient thing, and neither of them mentioned this. Then Hagrid said, as if remembering himself, "Dumbledore wanted me to give ya this." He produced an envelope, thick cream, with the Hogwarts seal. A letter. Personal-like, from the headmaster. Harry took it and looked at it. He did not open it immediately. He set it on the table beside his cake. Hagrid watched this. He was, under the warmth and the enthusiasm and the slightly chaotic energy, a perceptive man. You're not nervous about Hogwarts, are ya, Harry?" "No," Harry said. "Excited?" "Yes." He paused. "I'm also aware of what's hidden in the castle this year, and roughly how the relevant situation is going to develop, and I have a few questions about the third-floor corridor that I'd like to ask before I actually get there." Hagrid made a sound like a large surprised animal. How'd you, Gringotts reported a break-in last year. I know what was in Vault 713 before it was moved. Flamel's name isn't difficult to find if you know where to look." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to cause trouble, Hagrid. I'm not going to go blundering down that corridor out of reckless curiosity. But I'd like to know what I'm walking into." The kitchen was very quiet. Fawkes made a quiet sound from the top of the refrigerator. Hagrid looked at Harry Potter, age 11, with his father's black hair and his mother's eyes, sitting across a kitchen table with a birthday cake and a cup of tea and a look of absolute calm, and his enormous face went through a series of expressions that settled, finally, on something that was mostly love and also a significant amount of helpless admiration. "You're too much like your mum," he said, roughly. "Too much by half." "I'll take that," Harry said. Hagrid picked up his tea and drank half of it in one go. "Can't tell ya about the specifics. Not my place. But I'll tell ya," he leaned forward and his voice dropped to a rumble, "there are people who care very much about what happens to you. Not just because of who you are or what they need ya fair. But because you're James and Lily's boy." He stopped, jaw working. "That's all I'm gonna say about that." Harry held the old man's, because Hagrid was old in the way people are old when they've lived fully, despite being only in his 50s, held his eyes, and nodded. "That's enough," he said. "Thank you." They went to Diagon Alley on Wednesday. Diagon Alley was not subtle. Harry had expected something extraordinary and got something more than that, a street full of moving windows and impossible architecture and the constant sensory richness of an entire world going about its business in ways that the laws of physics had apparently agreed not to comment on. He walked down the middle of it with Hagrid as escort and Fawkes on his shoulder and the look of someone who has been reading about a country for years and has finally walked off the plane. The reactions were interesting. The first few people who saw him just saw a thin boy with black hair and round glasses being shepherded by Hagrid, nothing unusual, and then the second look would come, the lightning bolt scar confirming what the hair had suggested, and then the whispers, which spread down the alley like a lit fuse. Harry Potter was here. Harry Potter was at Gringotts, opening his own vault, thank you, he had the key. Harry Potter was at Madame Malkin's, getting robes fitted, and the woman fitting his robes kept forgetting where she'd pinned things because she kept looking at his face. Harry Potter was at Flourish and Blots, and he went well beyond the required reading list, and he had a brief, precise conversation with the bookseller about the gaps in the standard defense against the dark arts curriculum that left the bookseller staring at his own shelves as if seeing them differently. Ollivander's was the most interesting. The wand maker came out of the back with the attention of someone who'd been expecting this appointment and had been thinking about it. He was old in the way ancient things are old, not decrepit but endured, accumulated, layered with more years than show on the surface. "Harry Potter," he said. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." He looked at Fawkes, and something moved across his face that was almost reverence. "And Fawkes." A pause. "Remarkable. Mr. Ollivander," Harry said. "You'll know, of course, that the tail feather in your father's wand came from Fawkes." Ollivander's pale eyes were moving between Harry and the phoenix with the focus of someone doing difficult arithmetic. And that the wand's brother wand gave you that scar? He tilted his head. Curious. Very curious indeed that you would come in here with the very bird, and in this condition. What condition? Harry said. Unbound, Ollivander said, simply. He pulled a measuring tape from his pocket that began taking measurements without being told to. I can see it, you know. A wand maker's eye, after a few decades, learns to see the shape of a wizard's magic. Yours is, he searched for the word, it is what it always should have been. Another pause, something careful in it. Someone tried very hard to make it otherwise. Yes, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him for a long, unreadable moment. Then he turned to his shelves. Let us find you something suitable. It took 47 wands. Not because nothing was working, the first 6 produced sparks, light, a gentle warm gust. But each time Harry held one and the wand responded, Ollivander would take it back with a slight frown, as if checking the response against something in his head. By the 30th wand the old man was visibly absorbed, muttering to himself, his quick movements carrying a focused energy that was nothing like the mechanical trial and error it might have looked like from the outside. The 47th wand was 11 inches, holly, with a core that Ollivander held in his hands for a moment before fitting it, and when he handed it over the wand's response was nothing like the sparks and gusts of the others. It was warm and immediate and settled, the way a handshake settles when both people mean it, not dramatic, not showy, just right with a completeness that made everything else retroactively feel not quite. Fawkes sang one clear note. Ollivander looked at the bird, and then at Harry, and his expression was something that had started as professional fascination and become something more personal. The core, he said, is a tail feather. From Fawkes. He looked at Harry steadily. There are exactly 2 wands with Fawkes feathers. You have one. The other, gave me this, Harry said, touching his scar without self-consciousness. Yes. Ollivander's voice was very careful. I wonder which of you will go further. I'm not competing with a dead man, Harry said. Something shifted in the old wandmaker's face, surprise, recalibration, and then a slow nod of what appeared to be genuine respect. No, Ollivander said. No, I don't suppose you are. Harry paid 7 galleons, thanked him, and left with his wand in his jacket pocket, warm against his side. On the train back from Diagon Alley, Hagrid said, with the air of someone who had been sitting on this for several hours, the letter. From Dumbledore. Are ye going to read it? Harry had it in his inside pocket. He'd been thinking about it on and off all day. Yes, he said. I'm going to read it tonight. He looked out the train window at the outskirts of London going past. He'll want to meet me before September 1st. He's been watching, you know about the Watchers. Hagrid's face confirmed that he did know, and that he found this particular moment uncomfortable. I'm not angry about the Watchers, Harry said, not looking away from the window. He's worried. I understand why he's worried. I would be worried too, in his position. He paused. I just want him to understand, before I walk into his school, that his position and my position are not the same thing. They've never been the same thing. Hagrid said nothing. Outside, London became suburbs became fields. He put 31 bindings on me, Harry said, conversationally, still watching the fields. I've been counting them since I was 6. 31 separate magical constraints on a child under 2 years old. Some of them protective, some of them, not protective. He glanced at Hagrid. You didn't know about them. I can tell. You're not someone who could know and not tell me. Hagrid looked like he'd been hit somewhere soft. No, he said, roughly. No, I didn't know. I know. Harry looked back at the window. That's not your failing. That's his. They rode in silence for a while. The fields turned gold in the afternoon sun. He did what he thought was right, Hagrid said finally, in the tone of a man who loves someone and is also not sure anymore. "I know," Harry said. "That's the most frightening thing about him." Dumbledore's letter was short. It said that he understood things had changed, that he hoped they might speak before term began, that he would come to Privet Drive at Harry's convenience, and that he remained, as always, Harry's most sincere ally and servant. It was written in the flowing, careful hand of a man who had spent a very long time choosing words, and it was signed simply Albus. Harry read it twice. He noted that it did not mention Fawkes, did not mention the bindings, did not explain or justify or apologize. It made an appointment and called itself an ally. He wrote back. His letter said, "I'll meet you at the library on Magnolia Road on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Tell your people to wait outside." It was unsigned. He tied it to Fawkes's leg because he didn't have an owl, and Fawkes regarded this arrangement with the philosophical tolerance of a very powerful being for whom the errand was beneath them but who was doing it anyway because they'd decided to. Thursday at 2 o'clock, Harry walked into the library and sat at his usual table by the window and arranged 3 books in front of him that he was not actually going to read, and waited. Dumbledore came in at 4 minutes past 2. He was wearing Muggle clothes, a very nice grey suit that sat on him oddly, like someone else's skin, and his silver hair was in a neat plait and his half-moon glasses were the same ones Harry remembered from a memory he hadn't been supposed to keep. The librarian at the desk looked up and then looked away, which suggested a mild confundus charm, smoothly cast, quick. Harry filed this away. Dumbledore saw him and stopped for just a moment, the smallest pause, a half-beat of adjustment, and Harry watched the old man process the difference between the child he'd last magically assessed and the child sitting here now, clear-eyed and still, with a phoenix perched on the table beside his books. Then Dumbledore moved again, and his face had settled into something warm and gentle and very composed, and he sat down across from Harry. "Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. They looked at each other. Dumbledore's eyes were the famous blue, the color that inspired trust in the way a clear sky inspires trust, the sense that something honest is happening. Harry looked at them and noted this and noted that trust inspired by a quality of color is not the same as trust earned. "You look well," Dumbledore said. "Much better than," he stopped himself. "Than you expected?" Harry said. "Or than you'd planned for?" A pause. Not awkward. Dumbledore was too skilled to have awkward pauses. Considered. "Both, perhaps," he said, with a kind of honesty that was clearly designed to invite reciprocal honesty, the conversational equivalent of a partial surrender that invites you to put down your own weapons. Harry didn't put anything down. He wasn't carrying weapons in the first place. "I want to talk to you about the bindings," he said. "Not today. I don't know you well enough yet. But I want you to know I know they were there, I know how many, and I know the difference between the ones that were protective and the ones that weren't." Something moved across Dumbledore's face that wasn't the performed warmth. Something older and quieter. "Yes," he said. "I would like very much to discuss that with you. When you're ready." "Good." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'm going to Hogwarts in September. I'm going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to handle the situation with Voldemort," Dumbledore's eyes sharpened, "when it develops, which I expect will be this year given the stone. And I'm going to do all of that on my own terms. And if I tell you," Dumbledore said, very gently, "that your terms and the requirements of the situation may not always align? Then we'll have a conversation," Harry said, "rather than a set of bindings." The library was very quiet. Someone's chair scraped 2 shelves over. A child laughed somewhere in the picture book section. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. And then, slowly, something in the old man's face shifted, not crumbling, not breaking down, but settling, the way ground settles after a long rain. It was not quite defeat and it was not quite relief and it was very complicated. "You are remarkably like your mother," he said, and the warmth in his voice at that wasn't performed. It was just real. "That's the second time I've been told that this week," Harry said. I'm beginning to think she was someone worth being like. She was extraordinary, Dumbledore said simply. And for a moment, just briefly, he was nothing more than an old man who had loved people and lost them and was sitting in a library in borrowed Muggle clothes looking at a boy who carried them forward. Harry let that moment exist. Then he said, "I'll see you at Hogwarts, Professor." He picked up his books and stood. Fawkes stepped from the table to his shoulder with the easy precision of long practice. Dumbledore remained seated, looking at the table where Harry had been. "September 1st, he said. "Yes." Harry walked out into the August afternoon and stood on Magnolia Road in the warm light and looked up the street toward the library where he'd spent 5 years becoming himself, and felt, with a clarity that sat in his chest like the first breath of cold air after a very long time indoors, that he was ready. Fawkes sang 4 quiet notes against his ear. "I know," Harry said. "Me too." Chapter 3, Platform 9 3/4 of a lie. The 1st of September arrived like a starting pistol. Harry was awake before his alarm, sitting on the edge of his bed with his trunk already packed, had been packed since Monday, neat and organized with the particular thoroughness of someone who finds disorder genuinely irritating. His books were arranged by subject with the ones he'd need most on top. His wand was in the inner pocket of his jacket where it sat warm and quiet, not humming exactly but present in the way that only his wand was present, a kind of resonance that he'd already started thinking of as normal. Fawkes was on the windowsill watching the street with the air of a creature already thinking about Scotland. He'd said goodbye to Neville yesterday. Neville's grandmother was taking him to King's Cross herself, a production that Neville had described with the fond exasperation of someone whose grandmother did everything as if it were a military campaign. They'd shaken hands at the library gate and Neville had looked simultaneously terrified and determined in the exact combination that Harry had come to think of as Neville's natural state, and Harry had said, "You'll be brilliant," with enough certainty that Neville had stood an inch taller going back down the path. Petunia made breakfast without being asked, which had been happening occasionally for a year now and which Harry never commented on because commenting on it would make it a thing and making it a thing would make it complicated. He ate it, thanked her, and she said nothing and looked at the window. Vernon drove him to King's Cross in the kind of charged silence that had replaced the old charged silences. The old ones had been about dominance. This one was about something neither of them had a word for. At the drop-off, Vernon put the car in park and stared through the windscreen and then said, gruffly, "Don't, that is," he stopped. "Try it again. Don't do anything stupid." "I won't," Harry said. "Right." Vernon put the car back in gear. Harry got his trunk out of the boot and that was that. He stood on the pavement outside King's Cross with his trunk, his wand, his phoenix, and the steady warm certainty that had lived in his chest for 5 years, and walked inside. The Muggle part of King's Cross was all echoing announcements and shoe squeaks and the particular smell of a space that moves many thousands of people and therefore smells faintly of all of them. Harry moved through it with his trunk on a trolley, Fawkes riding the top of the trunk with his wings half folded for balance, and the crowd parted around them the way crowds part around anything that looks like it knows exactly where it's going. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, paused, and walked through it. The Hogwarts Express was red and gleaming and enormous and breathing real steam into the cool morning air, and the platform was, Harry stood for a moment and just took it in. The sound of it, the color of it, the density of life all moving in different directions, families and trunks and owls and cats and one boy near the back who appeared to have brought a toad that was making a concerted escape attempt. Wand sparks going off in the distance from a group of older students. A woman in lime green robes with spectacular silver earrings kissing the top of her twin sons' identical red heads. It was extraordinary. Harry found a trolley station, got his trunk sorted, and was working out the carriage configuration when a voice behind him said, very clearly and with the pedantic emphasis of someone correcting a record, "The standard loading procedure is to go from the front carriage toward the back, that way you don't have to fight the crowds going the other direction." He turned around. The girl had bushy brown hair and front teeth that she was going to grow into eventually and eyes that were sharp and assessing and very brown. She was holding a book that she'd clearly been reading while walking, which was either impressive or dangerous depending on the crowd density. She had a slight smudge of ink on her left hand near the thumb, and she was wearing her Hogwarts robes already, which meant she'd either been told to or was the kind of person who didn't see any reason to wait. "Hermione Granger," she said, because apparently they were past introductions and into whatever came after. "You're Harry Potter." I recognized well, obviously. She gestured at Fawkes with the hand not holding the book, in the manner of someone gesturing at the obvious. "Harry," Harry said. "The front-to-back loading thing, is that from a Hogwarts book or did you work it out yourself?" She blinked. This was clearly not the response she'd been expecting. "Both, actually. Hogwarts, a history mentions the carriage configuration, and then logically, makes sense," Harry said. He turned the trolley toward the front carriages. "Hermione, do you know anyone on the train yet?" "No," she said, and something in the single syllable carried the familiar weight of someone for whom that answer had been the answer for quite a long time. She covered it immediately with brisk competence. "I introduced myself to a few people in the car park, but most of them seemed, they were with their families." "Walk with me," Harry said, and started moving. She fell into step beside him without apparent decision, as if the momentum of the thing had simply carried her there, and then looked slightly surprised at herself for being there. Fawkes turned one amber eye toward her, regarded her for a moment, and made a sound of mild approval. Hermione's hand moved toward the phoenix with the involuntary gesture of someone who wanted to touch it and then stopped herself on the grounds of not knowing if that was appropriate. "You can," Harry said. "Can what?" "Touch him. He won't mind." She looked at Fawkes, then at Harry, then at Fawkes again. Then she reached out and very carefully, with the precise lightness of someone who handles things they care about very gently, ran 2 fingers along the leading edge of Fawkes's wing. Fawkes produced a single warm note that Hermione felt rather than heard, and her expression went soft in a way that was probably the most unguarded she'd been all morning. "He's extraordinary," she said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. They found a compartment near the front and loaded the trunk and settled in, and Harry looked out the window at the platform and watched it. Fawkes arranged himself on the luggage rack with the satisfaction of a creature who has decided this is where he will be. Hermione had already opened her book again, but the way she was holding it, the slight angle, the occasional glance at the window, said she was using it as a social shield more than an actual reading implement. Harry understood this. He'd done it himself for years. "What are you most looking forward to?" he said. The book came down an inch. "Charms, I think. And transfiguration, the practical application of mathematical principles to physical transformation, the theoretical framework is, well, it's genuinely interesting." She looked at him carefully, clearly prepared for the conversation to go the way these conversations usually went. "What about you?" "Defense," Harry said. "Though I understand the teacher situation is complicated this year." "There's a new defense teacher every year," Hermione said, immediately. "No one knows exactly why, but Hogwarts, a history mentions a rumor about a curse on the post." "Yes," Harry said, and because he was thinking about it, "I'd be curious about the mechanism." A curse that specifically targets a teaching position is fairly precise magic. Someone with both the skill and the motivation to curse a Hogwarts post, he let the thought develop, isn't a small number of people. Hermione stared at him. Her book had gone fully down now, held in her lap forgotten. "You think it was specifically placed? Not just an ambient effect from what? The castle's full of protective magic, not hostile magic. Whatever hit that position was aimed." He paused. "It's interesting, that's all." She was looking at him with the particular focused intensity of someone who has just encountered something they don't have a category for and is rapidly building one. "You've thought about this a lot." "I've had time. Most people, most 11-year-olds don't," she stopped herself. "That sounds condescending." "I didn't mean, you meant that most people your age aren't interested in the same things you are," Harry said. "Which is true. It's not condescending to notice it. It's just accurate." The sharp brown eyes studied him. "You're not what I expected," she said. What did you expect? I read about you. Quite a bit, actually. The books about the Voldemort, she got the name out without flinching, which Harry noted approvingly, the war, about your parents, about what you did when you were 1. I had a sort of mental image. She looked at Fawkes. It didn't include a phoenix. Most things don't, Harry said. She smiled, quickly, as if she'd checked it first. It was a good smile. The door to their compartment slid open. The boy in the doorway was round-faced and anxious and holding a toad that was in the process of trying to leave again. He had the look of someone who had already been having a complicated morning. Sorry, have either of you? I've lost Trevor. Well, I've still got him actually. He looked down at the toad in his hand, then up at them, then broke into the sheepish expression of someone who has discovered mid-sentence that the situation has resolved itself. Neville, Harry said. Neville Longbottom looked at Harry Potter, and his entire face did the thing it had been doing for 4 years whenever the world turned out to be less frightening than he'd expected. Harry. A pause, enormous relief flooding in. You're in this carriage. Brilliant. Come in. Neville, this is Hermione Granger. Hermione, this is Neville Longbottom. Sit down, there's plenty of room. Neville sat, Trevor secured in both hands, and nodded at Hermione with the slightly careful quality he brought to new people. Hermione nodded back with the slightly careful quality she brought to everyone. Fawkes looked down from the luggage rack and Neville said, "Morning, Fawkes," with the easy familiarity of 4 years, and Fawkes returned this with a sound that clearly constituted a greeting. Hermione watched this exchange. You know each other. Library, Neville said. We grew up together, Harry said. More or less. Hermione looked between them with a slightly wistful expression that she covered very quickly. Harry pretended not to see it. The train lurched, then started moving. King's Cross platform began to slide past the window, the crowd on it shrinking, and Harry watched it go and felt the particular quality of an ending and a beginning sharing the same moment, the way a door closing and a door opening are the same door, just in different states. Right, he said. We have about 5.5 hours. Tell me what you both know about Hogwarts and we'll compare notes. The compartment door opened again at approximately 2 hours north of London, and this time it opened with more force than necessary and admitted 3 people who were clearly arriving as a unit. Draco Malfoy came in first, which was the point. Crabbe and Goyle were a backdrop, physical mass arranged to suggest importance. Malfoy himself was fine-featured and pale and carefully assembled, the kind of person who'd learned early that presentation was a form of argument. He'd clearly spotted Harry from the corridor, the glance had that split-second quality of recognition that's been prepared for. Harry Potter, he said, with the slightly elevated inflection of someone who'd been practicing the approach. Malfoy, Harry said. This landed wrong for Malfoy, whose script had not apparently included Harry knowing his name already, and who recalibrated in a way that was quick enough to be impressive. Heard you were on the train. Thought I'd come introduce myself. Draco Malfoy. He extended his hand. Harry looked at the hand. He was not hostile about this, but he also wasn't in a hurry. He'd thought about the Malfoys. He'd read about the Malfoys, their history, their alignment during the war, their particular brand of intelligence that ran alongside their arrogance rather than underneath it. Draco Malfoy was not stupid. That was the important thing. He was also, at this specific moment, doing a performance of himself rather than being himself, which was a thing Harry had gotten very good at recognizing. He shook the hand. Harry. Malfoy's eyes moved to Fawkes and something happened in them that he didn't manage to fully contain, genuine awe, almost involuntary, before the practiced composure closed back over it. Is that, yes, Harry said. He was Dumbledore's, Malfoy said, and it came out as a question that was trying to be a statement. He was, Harry said. Now he's mine. Malfoy processed this with the focus of someone filing it in several categories at once. His eyes moved to Neville, and the quality of his attention changed, dismissive, slightly contemptuous, the kind of glance that has been taught rather than developed. Then they moved to Hermione, and something else happened, the specific calibration of someone from an old family encountering an unknown quantity. Granger, he said, having clearly already identified everyone on the train. Malfoy, Hermione said, with the flat precision of someone who knows exactly how a conversation like this works and is not interested in performing her part. Malfoy looked back at Harry. He was trying to work out the configuration, the famous Harry Potter sitting with Longbottom and a Muggleborn, and a phoenix that used to belong to the most powerful wizard in Britain sitting on the luggage rack above them like it lived there. You should know, he said, settling on what he probably considered safe ground, that in the wizarding world, some families matter more than others. It's worth knowing who's who. It is, Harry said. For example, I know your father supported Voldemort during the war and then said he'd been under the Imperius curse, and that this story was accepted largely because your family donated a very significant sum to the Minister of Magic's campaign fund. The temperature in the compartment changed. Crabbe and Goyle, who had been lounging with the confidence of large people in small spaces, became subtly more alert. Malfoy's face had gone through the quick internal calculation of someone who has been surprised and is deciding between responses. Harry hadn't said it nastily. He'd said it the way he said things that were true and relevant, straightforwardly, without heat, the way you state weather. You want to be careful, Malfoy said, and his voice had gotten quieter, which was more interesting than if it had gotten louder. I'm always careful, Harry said. You're intelligent, Malfoy. I noticed that straight away. The question is whether you're using that intelligence in your own interests or in your family's. Malfoy stared at him. He was, Harry could see, genuinely uncertain, which was not a state he was comfortable in. The practiced Malfoy confidence was still there, but it had shifted slightly on its foundations, like a building that's been told something about its soil. Those aren't different things, Malfoy said finally. They are, though, Harry said, not unkindly. But you don't have to figure that out today. Another silence. Malfoy looked at Fawkes one more time, and the awe was back, very briefly, before he covered it. Then he straightened. I'll see you at the sorting, he said, and left with Crabbe and Goyle, who had understood almost nothing of what had happened but knew it wasn't how it was supposed to go. The door slid shut. Neville let out a breath. Hermione was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved through surprise and arrived at something more thoughtful. His father supported Voldemort, she said. Allegedly under coercion, Harry said. Though the timing and the donation suggest otherwise. And you just said that. To his face. It's true. You're not worried about, no, Harry said, simply, and went back to the window. Ron Weasley arrived at 40 minutes south of Hogsmeade Station with a smudge of something on his nose that turned out to be cauldron cake and the slightly windswept quality of someone who'd been having a good time elsewhere and had run out of compartments. He was easy-natured and laughed quickly and had 6 older brothers' worth of opinions about Hogwarts, most of which were entertaining and several of which were factually wrong, and Hermione corrected the factual ones with the focused efficiency of a person for whom wrong information is a kind of ambient discomfort. Ron took this well, which went up in Harry's estimation of him. He was also, Harry noticed, one of those people who is genuinely kind without thinking about it. When the cauldron cake conversation turned to Harry's family, and the answer was essentially dead and then Dursley's, Ron had said, "That's rubbish, I'm sorry," with no embellishment and no attempt to fill the space with something cheerful, which was exactly right. He tried very hard not to react to Fawkes and failed comprehensively. Is it all right if he pointed at the phoenix. He decides, Harry said. Fawkes regarded Ron for 2 seconds and then made a sound of clear assent and held out one wing in a way that Ron had clearly not been expecting. Ron went very still and then reached out and very carefully touched the edge of the feathers, and his face did something young and unguarded and immediately precious. Wicked, he breathed. Yes, Harry agreed. They pulled into Hogsmeade just as the sky outside went the deep bruised purple of early dark, and the compartment emptied with the momentum of several hundred people suddenly having a destination, and Harry stood on the platform in the cool Scottish dark with his face tipped up slightly, the castle lights visible on the hill above them. It looked like something from very deep memory, the way things do when you've imagined them for years and then they turn out to be real and bigger and better and somehow exactly right all at once. Hagrid's voice boomed across the platform. Fur's years. Fur's years over here. Harry walked toward the voice. The boats were small and the lake was enormous and the sky was enormous and the castle was more enormous than either. Harry sat in the front boat with Neville, who was gripping the sides, and Hermione, who was watching the castle with the stunned look of someone for whom reality has just upgraded significantly, and they moved across the black water in the dark. The ceiling of the great hall was the stars. Harry had read about this. He'd formed a mental image of it. His mental image had been inadequate. The ceiling was the actual sky, not painted, not charmed to look like the sky, but a direct magical view of it, stars and the thin edge of a moon and the deep blue-black of a Scottish autumn night, vast and genuine and immediately convincing as a metaphor for something about magic that he hadn't quite had the language for until now. Magic is the world being larger than it looks. This ceiling was just that, made literal. The candles floated. The long tables gleamed. 500 students in black robes looked at the first years processing down the central aisle, and Harry felt the weight of all those eyes and didn't adjust his walk or drop his chin or change anything, just walked. Fawkes flew. He'd left Harry's shoulder at the entrance to the castle and circled once overhead and then gone up, impossibly up, into the vaulted space above the candles, and now he moved above the great hall in slow, wide arcs, the amber of his feathers catching the candlelight, and the sound he made was barely audible from down here but Harry could feel it, the resonance of it, in his chest where the bond lived. Every set of eyes in the hall went up. A phoenix moving through the space above Hogwarts' Great Hall was not a sight anyone present had seen before, and the silence it produced was different from the silence of 500 people being quiet on purpose. It was the silence of 500 people having the same involuntary reaction at the same time, a held breath, a collective pause, the world taking a beat. Dumbledore was on his feet at the head table. Harry caught his eye briefly as he walked, and the old man's expression was composed and warm, and underneath both of those things was something more complicated, the careful attention of someone watching a situation that has left his control and is trying to understand the shape of the new reality. Harry held his gaze for 2 seconds and then looked forward. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool. The hat sang. Harry listened to the song with genuine attention because the hat's song wasn't just tradition, it was a yearly self-report from a consciousness that had been watching Hogwarts for 1,000 years, and those reports, if you listened properly, contained more than the official version. The sorting began. Hermione Granger, Gryffindor, quick and certain. She walked to the table with the relief of someone who'd been worrying about this outcome and can now release the worry and become interested in the next thing. Neville Longbottom, Gryffindor, after a pause that was longer than most. Neville looked surprised, which told Harry something about what Neville thought of himself, and Harry made a mental note. Draco Malfoy, Slytherin, so fast the hat barely touched his head, which was either because the answer was obvious or because someone had prepared him. Harry suspected the latter. When they called Potter Harry, the hall did the thing Harry had known it would do, the murmur, the craning of necks, the ripple of reaction. He walked up to the stool and sat down, and the hat was placed on his head. It came down over his eyes and the interior of it was very dark, and then, well, said a voice in his head, dry and interested and old in the way only things that have accumulated centuries can be old. Now this is unexpected. Hello, Harry said back. I have sorted 5,214 students in my time, the hat said, with what might have been professional pride. And I have never felt anything quite like this. A pause, like someone turning a fascinating object in their hands. Someone tried very hard to make you smaller than you are. Yes, Harry said. And a phoenix destroyed the effort. Yes. The hat was quiet for a moment that was longer than most of its sorting pauses. Harry was aware of the hall waiting below him, the quiet growing pointed, but he wasn't bothered by it. He was having a genuinely interesting conversation. You could go anywhere, the hat said, and it wasn't a performance, it was just accurate. Slytherin would have you in a heartbeat, you have that precision, that self-possession. Ravenclaw would love you, the mind on you is extraordinary. Hufflepuff, a thoughtful pause, actually Hufflepuff would be very good for you in ways you haven't considered yet. And Gryffindor, of course, has the courage and the fire. I'm not interested in being chosen, Harry said. I'm interested in choosing. Are you? The Hat said. Not a question. My whole life, Harry said, has been choices made for me. I'd like to make this one myself. Another pause. You know, the Hat said, with what might have been amusement in something that ancient, in 1,000 years no one has ever put it quite like that. Then, where do you want to go? Harry thought about it. He thought about Neville, nervous and underestimated and somehow in Gryffindor. He thought about Hermione, who needed people around her who weren't intimidated by intelligence. He thought about what he was walking into this year, and what the year after that might bring, and the shape of the battles that were coming, and who he wanted near him for them. Gryffindor, he said. Gryffindor, the Hat announced. The response was different from the others. The Gryffindor table erupted first, but then the whole hall joined in some fashion, not the uniform polite applause but something louder and more uneven, the sound of hundreds of people responding to something they're not sure how to categorize. Above them, Fawkes folded his wings and dropped like a flame, landing on Harry's shoulder as he stood up, and that sound, that combined sound of several hundred people and a phoenix in the same moment, was the sound of Harry Potter arriving at Hogwarts. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat between Neville and an empty seat that Ron Weasley filled 30 seconds later. Hermione was across from him. She was looking at the professor at the head table, specifically at the one who appeared to be trying to make himself invisible, the pale, turban-wearing professor in the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. Quirrell, Harry said quietly. Hermione looked at him. You know him? I know about him. He picked up his pumpkin juice. He's the thing worth watching this year. She opened her mouth to ask how he knew that, then closed it, then said, Are you going to tell me? Yes, Harry said. But not here. Dumbledore rose to give his start-of-term announcements. His eyes found Harry's table, found Harry, and Harry met his gaze pleasantly. The old man's expression gave nothing away. Neither did Harry's. Around them, the food appeared. After the feast, the first years followed Percy Weasley, Ron's brother, very tall and very earnest and wearing his prefect badge with the dedication of a person who considers it a calling, through corridors that moved and staircases that shifted and past portraits that watched with genuine curiosity. Harry walked and watched. He was cataloguing. The castle had a quality he'd been anticipating from the books but hadn't been able to fully imagine, it was alive. Not metaphorically. The stones had absorbed 1,000 years of magic the way cloth absorbs dye, slowly and deeply and completely, until the magic was in the grain of the thing rather than applied to the surface. He could feel it through the soles of his shoes, the same hum he'd felt in the walls of Privet Drive but here vast and deep and confident, the hum of something that has been itself for a very long time. He pressed his palm against the wall of a turning corridor, briefly, and felt the castle press back. What are you doing? Hermione asked from behind him. Introducing myself, Harry said, and turned the corner. The Gryffindor common room was exactly as portrayed, fat armchairs, roaring fire, bulletin board covered in parchment, the scarlet and gold of it warm and immediate. Students settled in with the ease of homecoming. Harry stood in the middle of it for a moment and looked around. Neville appeared at his elbow. It's good, isn't it? He said quietly. It's very good, Harry said, and meant it. He went to the window of the dormitory that night and looked out at the grounds, at the black lake visible far below, at the forbidden forest that edged the castle's light. He could feel the castle humming around him, accommodating his presence, and in his chest the bond with Fawkes was warm and steady, and somewhere in the castle an old man with half-moon glasses was in his circular office thinking about this particular first year, and somewhere in the back corridors a turban-wearing professor had a face that wasn't entirely his own. There was a lot to do. Harry went to bed early because there was a lot to do in the morning first, and being rested was practical. He was asleep in 8 minutes, deeply and completely, with Fawkes settled on the bedpost and the castle keeping watch around him. In his sleep, one corner of his mouth turned up. Chapter 4, What the Castle Remembers. Hogwarts had its own logic, and Harry spent the first week learning it the way you learn a city, not from a map but from walking. The staircases moved on a schedule that wasn't entirely random, which meant if you paid attention you could predict them. The portraits talked freely but rarely said anything that wasn't in some way self-serving, which made them useful for misdirection and less useful for facts. The castle's magic responded to intent more than action. Doors that were supposed to be locked would open if you had a clear enough reason for being on the other side, and doors that were technically open would resist you if your purpose was murky. Harry tested this on the third day by standing in front of a locked broom closet on the 4th floor and simply wanting to know what was inside, and the lock turned with a click of almost apologetic ease. Dust. An old mop. Nothing interesting. But the principle was interesting, and he spent 20 minutes on the 5th floor that afternoon testing variations of it on various doors with the focused pleasure of someone doing an experiment they already know is producing good data. Classes had their own texture. Charms was taught by Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and technically brilliant, and who had the particular quality of good teachers everywhere. He loved his subject more than he loved being right about it. He demonstrated Wingardium Leviosa on the first day and Harry had the feather off the desk and cycling in a smooth figure 8 before Flitwick had finished the explanation, which produced a short silence and then a delighted squeak from the tiny professor. Wand work, Mr. Potter, or rather, the absolute minimum of it, fascinating. Tell me, are you compensating for the wrist motion by pushing more intent through the core, or, both, I think, Harry said. The wand seems to prefer it. Flitwick wrote something in his notebook with the absorbed focus of someone who has just developed a new research question. Harry moved on to making the feather do more complicated things while Flitwick taught the rest of the class the basic motion, and this became, more or less, the pattern of their charms lessons. Flitwick would teach, Harry would extend, and occasionally they'd meet in the middle for a genuinely interesting conversation that Hermione would join from across the room with questions that Flitwick also found delightful. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who was granite and precision and the specific kind of demanding that means the subject matters. She turned her desk into a pig and back on the first day with the efficient elegance of someone who has done this enough times that it's become a small pleasure rather than a demonstration, and Harry felt something in his chest go very attentive, the way it did when something was going to be worth understanding. He didn't rush in McGonagall's class. He worked at the same speed as everyone else until he understood the underlying principle, which took him to the end of the first lesson, and then in the second lesson he worked faster, and by the third he was working at something that made McGonagall pause mid-circuit of the desks and stand behind him for a moment without saying anything. "Where did you study before Hogwarts, Mr. Potter?" she said eventually. "Libraries," Harry said. "Magic," she said. "Wandless magic specifically. The control you're demonstrating doesn't come from theory." "No," he agreed. "I've been practicing for about 5 years." McGonagall looked at him with the expression she used when something didn't fit her existing categories and she was deciding whether to reassign her categories or ask more questions. She asked more questions, and Harry answered them honestly, and at the end of it McGonagall said, "Come to my office on Thursday. We'll see where you actually are," and this was the Gryffindor head of house's version of an enthusiastic welcome. Potions was Snape. Harry had thought about Snape. He'd pieced together the relevant history, Lily Evans, James Potter, the friendship that broke, the sides taken, the specific quality of grief that becomes resentment when it has nowhere better to go. He'd thought about it carefully and concluded that Snape was going to be complicated, and complicated was all right as long as you understood why. Snape swept in on the first day with the movement of someone who has cultivated their own entrance the way some people cultivate a garden, deliberately, over years, for maximum effect. He had his register and his introduction and the voice that could do more damage than a shout without ever raising volume, and he turned it all on Harry Potter with the particular quality of attention that Harry had been expecting. "Potter." He said the name the way some people say a word they've been carrying a long time. "Our new celebrity." The class was quiet. Harry looked at Snape, and Snape looked at Harry, and what Snape was clearly expecting, visible discomfort, the flinch of a child who'd been told to behave himself, didn't happen. Harry looked at him with the same clear steadiness he brought to everything, not defiant, not performing, just genuinely present. "Sir," Harry said. Snape's black eyes narrowed fractionally. "Tell me, Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions in existence. The combination works because asphodel belongs to the lily family." He paused, deliberately, just a beat, just enough, which has a particularly strong magical signature when combined with wormwood's binding properties. The classroom was very still. Snape was still too, but his stillness was different. It had changed quality midway through Harry's answer, when Harry had said lily family, and what it had changed into was difficult to read but definitely wasn't the contemptuous dismissal he'd had ready. "Where would you look," Snape said, after a pause, "if I asked you to find a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. Antidote to most poisons, which is why you'd want to know where it is before you need it rather than after." Another pause. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "Nothing," Harry said. "They're the same plant. Also called aconite. Highly toxic, used in the wolfsbane potion, which is interesting because something that's dangerous to most creatures in raw form becomes protective for werewolves when properly prepared. The transformation of function through process, that's actually one of the most elegant things about potions." He stopped, because he'd followed the thought further than the question required, and added, "Sir." Snape looked at him for a very long moment. The class held its collective breath. Whatever Snape had been planning to do next hadn't included Harry knowing any of that, and the revision of plans was visible even through the composed dark face. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in a voice that suggested each point caused him minor physical pain. "Don't think that means you can skip the practical work, Potter. Knowing the theory and making the potion are different skills." "Of course," Harry said. "I wouldn't skip the practical work. That's where the interesting things happen." Snape held his gaze for 2 more seconds, then turned away and continued the lesson. He didn't call on Harry again for the rest of the hour, which might have been punishment or might have been the response of someone who needed time to recalibrate, and Harry genuinely couldn't tell which. He brewed his potion, which came out exactly right, and set it on the desk at the end of the lesson and left without drama. In the corridor outside, Neville said quietly, "He hates me." Harry looked at him. "He's afraid of everything that reminds him of things he regrets," he said. "It comes out as cruelty to people who can't defend themselves yet. You can defend yourself. You just don't know it." Neville processed this. "How does knowing that help?" "It means it's not about you," Harry said. "Once you know it's not about you, you can stop absorbing it." Neville turned this over with the careful deliberation he brought to things worth keeping. "Right," he said, eventually. "Okay. Defense against the dark arts was the most interesting class in the worst possible way." Quirrell stammered. "He wore his turban. He smelled of garlic, which he explained was to ward off a vampire he'd encountered in Romania, which was either true or the cover story, and the specific quality of falseness in the explanation was something Harry noticed and noted. The class was instructionally poor. Quirrell's theoretical knowledge was adequate but his practical demonstrations were hesitant in a way that couldn't entirely be explained by nervousness, as if something about actually using defensive magic in this body, with this instructor at the back of his head, caused a specific kind of interference. Harry sat in the front row and did everything Quirrell asked exactly as asked and watched the professor the way you watch a puzzle you're not supposed to obviously be solving. He could feel something. It was faint and wrong and cold in the way that only things touched by dark magic are cold, not temperature but a quality of wrongness, like a note played just outside the scale of everything else. It came from the back of Quirrell's head, from behind the turban, and it pulsed very quietly and consistently with the rhythm of something alive but in the wrong way. Fawkes, who attended Harry's classes perched on the windowsill when there was one and on the desk when there wasn't, sat with his back to Quirrell at every lesson. Always. Without fail. Every other face in the room could point any direction, but Fawkes consistently and deliberately faced away from the professor. Harry watched this. He knew what it meant. He also knew that knowing it and acting on it prematurely were different things, and that patience was almost always the more strategic option when you had time to use it. He was polite to Quirrell. He answered questions, did the work, said good morning. Quirrell regarded him with a quality of attention that was trying to be casual and wasn't, that occasionally slipped into something hungrier and more focused when Quirrell thought no one was noticing. Harry noticed. He always noticed. What he was building, through these early weeks, was a complete picture. Each class was a piece of it. Each conversation in the common room was a piece. Each meal in the great hall where he watched the head table, Dumbledore's composed warmth, Snape's contained intensity, McGonagall's principled efficiency, Quirrell's careful performance of mild-mannered nervousness, all of it added to the picture. He was also, in the time between, doing something the other first-years weren't. He was learning the castle. Not just the accessible parts. Not just the corridors between dormitory and classroom. He went deeper and earlier and later than any first year had reason to go, and the castle let him. This was the thing he'd noticed on the first night, the castle didn't just tolerate his presence, it actively participated in his being there. Passages opened that weren't on any map he'd found. Doors acknowledged him. Once, in a fourth-floor corridor at 2 a.m, a section of wall simply moved aside and revealed a staircase going up that he was fairly certain connected to a tower he hadn't been able to access from any other direction. He went up it. The room at the top was circular and dusty and full of old telescopes, clearly an abandoned astronomy overflow, and it had the best view of the grounds he'd found anywhere in the castle. You could see the full sweep of the lake, the outline of the forbidden forest, the distant shimmer of the greenhouses. He sat on the dusty floor and looked out and thought. He was up there on a Thursday night in mid-October when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He didn't hide. He sat where he was and waited. Dumbledore came through the opening in the wall, which meant the wall had let him in too, which was interesting. The old man was in his night robes and carrying no wand that Harry could see, and he paused at the top of the stairs and looked at Harry sitting in the moonlight, and the expression on his face was something that hadn't been prepared in advance, it was just real, the look of a man who is always composing himself discovering that he's been caught mid-sentence. "I thought I'd find you here eventually," Dumbledore said, which was either true or the kind of thing you say when you're pretending you've been looking for someone. "Sit down if you want," Harry said. "The view's good." Dumbledore sat on the dusty floor with the easy adaptability of someone who has spent too long being impressive and has learned to find relief in its absence. He looked out the window at the lake. "I used to come here," he said. "A very long time ago. Before the telescopes were decommissioned." "What did you come here to do?" "Think," Dumbledore said. "And occasionally avoid conversations I wasn't ready for." He looked at Harry sideways, over the half-moon glasses, and the expression was wry in a way that acknowledged the irony. "I'm not avoiding you," Harry said. "I'm never avoiding you. If I wanted to avoid you I'd be in the dormitory." "No," Dumbledore said. "I know that. Avoiding things isn't, it's not your way, is it?" "Not particularly," Harry said. They sat for a moment in the kind of silence that is productive rather than uncomfortable, the kind where both people are actually thinking. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "Yes." "The ones that weren't protective. The bindings. There were 11 of them that weren't protective, or not only protective. I've been trying to understand the intent behind them specifically." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "What were they for?" Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that it wasn't avoidance, it was the pause of someone choosing not the words but the honesty. "Some of them," he said slowly, "were intended to make you accessible. Manageable. A version of yourself that would need guidance and accept it." "You wanted a weapon with a handle," Harry said. "That is," Dumbledore said, "an accurate and unflattering description." "Yes." The moonlight sat between them. "I believed," Dumbledore said, and his voice had lost its usual calibrated warmth and become something older and tireder, that the situation required a specific kind of hero. Certain in their purpose, manageable in their methods. A child who trusted the adults around them to know best. He paused. I believed this so thoroughly that I arranged for it. Without asking, Harry said. You were 11 months old, Dumbledore said. Then stopped. That is not a defense. It's just a fact. I know. Harry looked at the lake. I know you thought it was necessary. I know you were managing a situation that had no good options. I'm not, he chose the word carefully, I'm not consumed by it. I'm not going to spend my time at Hogwarts being angry at you about it. That would be boring and unproductive. Dumbledore made a small sound. That is, he said quietly, a remarkable amount of grace. It's not grace, Harry said. It's pragmatism. What you did is done. What matters is what happens now. He looked at the old man. What matters now is that you stop doing it. No more choices made about me without me. No more being managed. No, Dumbledore said, and for once the word was simple and clean and without subtext. And when the stone situation develops, Harry started. You know about that. Of course I do. When it develops, I'm involved because I choose to be, not because you've positioned me. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. His eyes were on the lake but his expression was internal, the look of a man having a conversation with himself at the same time as the conversation he's having out loud. May I ask you something in return? Yes. Are you afraid? Not of me. Not of any specific thing. But in general. Are you afraid? Harry thought about this honestly, which it deserved. No, he said. I understand that I probably should be, in the conventional sense. But no. He looked at the turret window. Voldemort is something that happened to my family and is going to try to keep happening. That's a problem to be solved. I'm good at problems. Dumbledore looked at him. The moonlight was very clear and the old face in it was stripped of its usual architecture of composure, just an old man sitting on a dusty floor next to an 11-year-old boy, and what was in the old face was complex and layered and at the bottom of all the layers was something that was simply love, the specific kind that comes with profound guilt attached to it. Lily would have liked you enormously, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. Hagrid told me. They sat for another while in the productive silence, and then Harry stood and said he was going to bed, and Dumbledore stood too, and they walked down the stairs together and parted in the fourth-floor corridor without further ceremony. Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower. Dumbledore walked in the other direction. Neither of them looked back. November arrived with cold that had real intent behind it, and with it came the first Quidditch match, which Harry attended as a spectator because he had not tried out for the team, which was an ongoing source of bafflement to most of the Gryffindor common room. You'd make Seeker easy, Ron said, for the fourth time, at breakfast 2 days before the match. First years never make the house team, yeah, but he gestured vaguely at Harry, indicating whatever quality he felt Harry obviously possessed. I know, Harry said. So why? I didn't want the time commitment, Harry said, which was true as far as it went. The fuller truth was that he had better things to do at 2 in the afternoon on alternate Wednesdays than circle a pitch, but the Quidditch argument would have required too many sub-arguments to be worth having. Hermione looked up from her Transfiguration notes. You could have just said that. I did just say that. 2 weeks ago when Ron first asked, you said, I'm fine watching. She gave him the expression she used when she thought he was being strategically minimal. I'm also fine watching, Harry said. The match itself was Gryffindor against Slytherin, and it was genuinely exciting in the way physical competition is exciting when people are good at it, speed and precision and the specific kind of beauty that comes from things being done well under pressure. Gryffindor won. The common room that night was extremely loud and someone produced butterbeers from somewhere and the fire was enormous and everyone was in a very good mood, and Harry sat in one of the fat armchairs and felt the warmth of all of it without needing to be in the center of it. Hermione appeared with 2 mugs of something and sat in the chair across from him and said, "I've been thinking about what you said on the train. About Quirrell." Harry looked at her. "You said he was the thing worth watching. You've been doing it all term. In every defense lesson, in the corridor, at meals." She held her mug with both hands. "I've been watching too. And I think there's something wrong with him." "Yes," Harry said. She waited, and when he didn't continue, "Are you going to tell me what it is? What do you think it is?" "I think," she stopped, and he could see the exact point where she crossed the line from reasonable inference into the territory where the inference sounded mad, and the expression she made crossing it was one he liked. She crossed it anyway, because Hermione Granger was the kind of person who followed reasoning wherever it led regardless of how it sounded. "I think there's something in the turban." "Behind it," Harry said. She stared at him. "Behind it?" "Yes. Something, alive." "Something alive that shouldn't be," Harry said. "Not a body. A remnant. A piece of a person who was very skilled at not dying." Hermione put her mug down. She looked at the fire for a long moment with the expression of someone taking a new piece of information and running it through every other piece they have and seeing where the changes propagate. "Voldemort," she said. "Yes. He's at Hogwarts. On the back of a professor's head. In the defense classroom." She processed this. "And the stone, the Philosopher's Stone, which I know is in the castle, it's in the 3rd floor corridor. I worked that out in September. He wants the stone." "Correct. And Dumbledore knows," she said. Then paused. "Does Dumbledore know about Quirrell specifically?" "He suspects," Harry said. "I don't think he has the full picture yet." He looked at her. "He set traps around the stone. A series of them. He's invited the confrontation, more or less, set it up so that the stone is theoretically accessible if you're skilled enough to get through the protections, because he expects that I'll be the one to stop Voldemort when the attempt happens." Hermione was very quiet. "Then, he planned for you to face Voldemort." "He's been planning it for 10 years, Harry said. "And how are you this calm about that?" "Because I was planning for it too," Harry said. "Just from a different direction." She looked at him with an expression that was part exasperated and part something else, something she hadn't named yet. "And Neville knows all of this?" "Some of it." "Should I be—" She stopped, then tried again. "Are we, the 3 of us, are we in this together?" Harry looked at her for a moment, the firelight catching the brown of her eyes, the careful directness of the question. She was asking about belonging as much as about strategy, and she was asking it in the most practical way she could because that was how she did things. "Yes," he said. "If you want to be." Something in her face settled like a knot releasing. "Right," she said, and picked her mug back up. "Then you should know I've been working on a countercharm for the sleeping draft component of the trap on the 3rd floor. I worked out the general trap design from the ingredients list for the restricted potions, cross-referenced with, 'Tell me,' Harry said, and she did." December crept in cold and crackling, and with it came the thing Harry had been expecting. The Mirror of Eriste appeared in a ground-floor corridor in the East Wing on a Tuesday night. Harry found it not because he was looking for it but because the castle told him about it in the way the castle had started communicating with him, not words, but a quality of attention, a directional sense, a gentle persistent awareness of where something interesting was happening. He went alone, after midnight, moving through corridors that the castle kept clear of anyone who might see him, because the castle had apparently decided that Harry's midnight wanderings were fine and that interference was unwelcome. The mirror was tall and ornate and its frame read Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi, which Harry untangled in about 10 seconds because reading things backwards was a habit he'd developed after finding a coded entry in one of his library books when he was 8. "I show not your face but your heart's desire." He stood in front of it and looked. His parents looked back at him. Not just them, a broader constellation, people who could have been grandparents and aunts and uncles, people he had no names for but who carried the genetic echo of his own face in their features. His mother, red-haired and bright-eyed, standing close enough that in the mirror she reached forward and touched his face. His father, black-haired and tall, with an expression of such unguarded pride that it sat directly on the raw place in Harry's chest and pressed. He stood there for 2 minutes. Then he turned around and walked back to Gryffindor Tower. He didn't go back. Not because it wasn't painful to walk away, it was, in the clean direct way that true things are painful when you look at them squarely, but because the mirror showed you something you couldn't have, and going back to look at things you couldn't have was its own kind of trap, and Harry was done with traps. He told Hermione about it the next morning. She asked, carefully, what he'd seen, and he told her, and she didn't offer comfort because she understood he wasn't asking for it, just nodded and held the information with the respect it deserved and said, "Dumbledore put it there." "Yes," Harry said. "As another trap." "As another test," Harry said. "He wants to know what I want. What drives me." He buttered his toast. "He's trying to recalibrate his model of me." "What does he think the mirror tells him?" "That I want my parents back." "Which is true but not useful as a weakness. Wanting them back doesn't compromise my judgment, it clarifies it." He looked at his plate. "My parents died for me. The least I can do is be someone worth dying for." Hermione looked at him across the breakfast table with that expression she'd developed over the last 3 months, the one that she'd probably have denied having. It was quiet and direct and slightly fierce, the expression of someone who has decided, fully and without reservation, that they're on a particular side. "You're occasionally very annoying," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Because you're right about things in ways that should be more unsettling than they are." "That's the most interesting thing you've said all week," Harry told her. She threw a piece of toast at him. Neville had his own arc through the autumn, and Harry watched it with the specific satisfaction of someone seeing a prediction come true. Snape's potions classes were the site of it. Snape had, from the first lesson, identified Neville as a target, not with the particular focused animus he'd started with toward Harry, which had recalibrated into something more like cautious respect, but with the easier contempt he reserved for the people he considered safely weak. He criticized Neville's work with a precision that was designed to dismantle rather than correct, and Neville responded by getting more nervous, which made the work worse, which gave Snape more to criticize. Harry watched this for 6 weeks. On the 7th week, he said, before the lesson started, "Neville, the key thing in the swelling solution is the temperature control between adding the pufferfish eyes and the growth sequence. Most people rush that transition because they're nervous. Don't rush it. You've got the precision. I've seen you handle Trevor's feeding schedule, which requires the same kind of timing." Neville looked at him. "Trevor's feeding schedule?" "The same part of your brain," Harry said. "Use it." Neville thought about this. Then he went into potions and made the best swelling solution in the class, not good, brilliant, an absolute textbook execution that Snape moved past 3 times without saying anything, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. And Neville sat a little straighter for the rest of that lesson, and the lesson after, and somewhere in December Harry noticed that the nervous quality in Neville's hands when he was working had largely gone and been replaced by concentration. "Whatever you said to him," Hermione told Harry, after witnessing Neville calmly correct Seamus Finnegan's cauldron preparation mid-lesson without anyone asking him to, "I think it worked." "He did it," Harry said. "I just pointed at what was already there." The last week before Christmas brought an attempted theft on the 3rd floor. Harry knew it was coming 2 days before it happened because Quirrell's behavior in defense changed, an uptick in the watching quality, the focused attention that slipped into hunger more often and for longer, the particular restlessness of someone whose timeline was about to move. He told Hermione and Neville at dinner on the 21st. "It's going to be soon. Before Christmas, I think, the castle will be emptier." Neville straightened. Hermione was already thinking 3 steps ahead, he could see it. "We're not stopping it tonight," Harry said. "The attempt is going to fail on its own, the protections will hold for now, and Quirrell doesn't have what he needs yet. But I want us to know where it happens and what he tries." "You want to watch," Hermione said. I want to understand the full picture before we move, Harry said. Going in blind is how you lose. We'll have one real chance at this. I want to know exactly what we're walking into before we walk. That's sensible, Neville said. Then, quietly, are we actually going to fight him? Voldemort? I'm going to handle Voldemort, Harry said. You and Hermione are going to handle the traps between here and him. Why us for the traps and you for, because I'm better at Voldemort, Harry said simply, without arrogance, the way you say you're better at something you've been specifically prepared your whole life to deal with. And you're both better at particular problems between here and there. Hermione's countercharm for the sleeping draft, Neville's herbology knowledge for the devil's snare, I've thought about this. They looked at him. You've been planning this since September, Hermione said. Since before September, Harry said. And you only just told us. I was still gathering information, Harry said. Now I have enough. Hermione looked like she wanted to be annoyed about this and couldn't quite manage it because the logic was sound. Neville looked like this was the most terrifying thing he'd ever heard and was choosing to find it exciting instead. Right, Neville said. When? New Year, Harry said. Or just after. Quirrell will try before then and fail, and we'll know what we're up against, and we'll go in with clear eyes. He looked at both of them. We go together, we go prepared, and we come back. All three of us. Hermione looked at the table for a moment, and then at Harry, and then at Neville, and she nodded once, with the quality of someone making a decision they've already made and are only now acknowledging out loud. Together, she said. Together, Neville said. Above them at the head table, Dumbledore was looking down the hall at the three Gryffindor first years with the expression of a man watching something he helped build taking a direction he didn't design. He picked up his goblet and drank slowly, his eyes staying on Harry, and Harry, without turning around, could feel the old man watching the way you feel weather change. The feast continued. The candles floated. The enchanted ceiling showed a clear winter sky, thick with stars, and Fawkes circled somewhere up there in the warmth and light above the great hall, moving in those slow arcs that looked like ease but were actually something more like keeping watch. Harry ate his pudding and thought about what came next. It was the same thing it had always been. Forward. Chapter 5, The Burning Answer. The first week of January was the coldest Harry had experienced at Hogwarts, the kind of cold that had weight to it, settling into the stones of the castle and the lake water and the grounds until everything had a preserved, held-breath quality. Most students were still home. The corridors were long and quiet and echoed differently without 500 people to absorb the sound. Harry liked it. He spent the first 3 days of the new year in systematic preparation, the kind that didn't look dramatic from the outside, reading in the library, talking through scenarios with Hermione in the empty common room, walking the corridors with Neville working out timing and distances. Fawkes was with him constantly in these days, which was normal, but with a quality of presence that was denser than usual, more deliberate, the way a person stands closer when they're paying particular attention. Hermione had finished her countercharm for the sleeping draft. She'd written it out in 3 drafts, each one tighter than the last, and on the 2nd of January she demonstrated it on a very small, very carefully prepared sample of the potion in a corner of the empty potions classroom, and the charm worked exactly as she designed it, which she received with the contained satisfaction of someone who had expected it to work and is pleased to be right but would never say so. Neville had been quietly studying Devil's Snare since October, when Harry had first told him it was part of what they'd face. He'd taken it seriously in the particular way Neville took things seriously when someone treated him as capable, thoroughly and without fuss, until he knew the plant better than most 6th years. He could describe its sensitivity to light and heat with the easy fluency of someone who has absorbed information they find genuinely interesting, which is always the best kind of knowing. Harry himself had been working on something that didn't have a name in any of his books, which was part of what made it interesting. He'd known since his birthday, since the night Fawkes burned away 31 bindings and the coal bright thing in his chest blazed up clean and full, that whatever lived in him went beyond the standard categories. Not dark magic, not light magic in the institutional sense. Something older than both, or underneath both, the base frequency that both drew from. He'd been reaching for it carefully all year, the way you reach for a very hot thing, not because it would burn him, he was fairly certain it wouldn't, but because he wanted to understand its edges before he put his full weight on it. By the 4th of January he understood its edges. He spent the morning of the 5th sitting very still in the empty astronomy tower with Fawkes on his knee and his eyes closed, just feeling the shape of what he was capable of. Not cataloguing it for anyone else's benefit. Just knowing. When he opened his eyes, he said to Fawkes, "Tonight." Fawkes sang one note that felt like agreement and preparation and something fiercer than either. He told Hermione and Neville at lunch. The castle was quiet around the three of them, just a handful of other staying students scattered down the table, and Harry said it simply, "Tonight." After dinner. Neville put down his fork. He'd been expecting this since the 2nd of January, but expecting something and having it arrive are different experiences, and the color in his face changed slightly. He breathed once, deliberately. Then he picked his fork back up. "Okay." Hermione said, "Are we waiting for a specific reason tonight versus tomorrow?" "Quirrell is going to try again tonight," Harry said. "He tried on the 22nd and the protections held, but he got further than the first time. He's been learning the layout, testing the sequence. Tonight he'll get through most of it." He ate. "I don't want to be behind him. I want to be ahead." "How do you know it's tonight?" Hermione said, not doubting exactly, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who wants to understand the information source. "The castle told me," Harry said. She absorbed this with the philosophical acceptance she developed for the category of things Harry knew that didn't have clean epistemological explanations. "Right," she said. "What time?" 2 in the morning. "After Quirrell moves." He looked at both of them. "We wait for him to go in. We give him 10 minutes. Then we follow." "Why 10 minutes?" Neville said. "Because whatever he disturbs going through, we want disturbed. He'll have dealt with the dog, the three-headed dog, Fluffy, Hagrid raised him, he'll have dealt with that before we get there, which saves us the problem. He'll leave the path clear." "We're using him," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "He's useful." They finished lunch. The afternoon was quiet study, individual, each of them in their own preparation, Hermione reviewing her charm, Neville reading about Devil's Snare one last time with the focused calm of someone who trusts what they know, Harry sitting with his back against the common room wall and his wand in his hand just holding it, feeling the resonance between them, making sure they were still the same thing they'd been when he'd bought it in Ollivander's. They were. At dinner nobody said much. Ron Weasley was home for the holiday, but a few other Gryffindors were present, and Harry ate normally and talked normally and laughed at something Seamus said across the table, and Hermione corrected something she overheard from a second year with her usual focused efficiency, and Neville fed Trevor a cricket he'd been keeping in his pocket for exactly this purpose. Just an evening. After dinner Harry went to the dormitory and lay down fully dressed for an hour, which was not sleeping but was the next best thing, a deliberate, intentional stillness that let everything settle. He could hear the castle breathing. He could feel Quirrell moving somewhere below him, the wrong cold of what lived behind the turban pressing against the background hum of the building the way a dissonant note presses against a chord. At 1:30 he got up. Put on his jacket. Picked up his wand. Fawkes was already awake, had been awake, watching the door. In the common room, Hermione and Neville were waiting. They were both in their school robes, which Harry had told them was fine, they weren't sneaking, exactly, or rather the castle was going to make sneaking unnecessary for them in a way it wouldn't for someone else. Hermione had her wand out and her counter-charm notes in her inside pocket. Neville had his herbology handbook not because he needed it but because having it was comforting, which was a perfectly valid reason to have a book. Nobody said anything. Harry looked at them once, they looked back, and that was enough. They moved. The castle cooperated the way it had been cooperating all year. Corridors empty. Staircases still. The portraits either asleep or looking the other direction with the studied inattention of beings who have decided not to officially know what's happening. Harry moved through all of it at a steady walk, not running, not crouching, just moving with the certainty of someone who belongs exactly where they are. The third-floor corridor was dark except for the blue moonlight coming through the windows at each end. The door to the forbidden section was ajar. Harry stopped outside it. Put his hand flat on the doorframe, feeling. The cold wrong quality of Voldemort was faint here, which meant Quirrell had gone through a while ago, further than the entrance, already deep in the trap sequence. Fluffy? Neville said quietly. Dealt with, Harry said. He could hear it, the massive deep breathing of a sleeping animal behind the door, steady and slow, the enchanted sleep of something that had heard music and gone under. He pushed the door open. Fluffy was enormous and unconscious and beautiful in the specific way three-headed dogs are beautiful when they're not actively trying to bite you. All three heads were down, breathing in slow synchrony. The harp in the corner was still faintly vibrating, the magic in its last few notes still cycling. Harry looked at the trapdoor in the floor, open, darkness below. Fawkes dropped from Harry's shoulder and hung in the air above the trapdoor, wings spread, casting a warm amber light downward. That'll help, Neville said. Going first, Harry said, and dropped through. The fall was longer than expected and he came down into something that grabbed immediately, thick coiling tendrils, dark and seeking, devil's snare. He'd read about this. He felt it tighten across his arms and recognized the reflex of it, the plant's instinct to respond to struggle with more struggle. He went still, completely and immediately still, not fighting, and felt the snare pause in its tightening, uncertain. Then he reached for the thing in his chest, the base frequency, and pushed warmth outward through his palms, not fire, not a spell, just heat and light and the quality of sunlight on a summer day, and the devil's snare recoiled from it the way it recoils from any light, pulling back, releasing, retreating to the walls. He was through it before Neville arrived, and he called up, "Don't panic. Go still first. Neville, light charm, Lumos, as bright as you can make it." Neville came through, felt the snare, went very still, good, and then his voice was steady when he cast, "Lumos. Bright enough." The snare pulled back. Hermione came through and the snare barely touched her before her countercharm flared and it retracted entirely. 3 seconds. Clean. They moved into the next chamber. The winged keys were chaotic and fast and numbered in the hundreds, all sizes, all speeds, circling in a chamber whose ceiling was so high it was essentially sky. The locked door on the far side was solid oak, old iron hinges. Harry could see the correct key, not because there was an obvious mark on it but because of the faint warm resonance it carried, the same frequency as the lock it was designed for, and when you could feel frequency you could track it. He held out his hand, palm up, and held the frequency clearly in his mind, and the correct key, small, silver, with a slightly bent left wing from the number of times it had been used and caught, curved through the chaos of its fellows and dropped neatly into his palm. Hermione made a sound behind him that was short and deeply impressed. Harry crossed to the door, unlocked it, held it open. "After you." They passed through. The chess set was spectacular and malevolent and entirely McGonagall's work, which Harry appreciated aesthetically even as he assessed it tactically. The pieces were enormous, obsidian and marble, and they moved with a quality of intention that the standard enchanted chess set didn't have. These pieces weren't following programmed responses, they were making decisions. The board was large enough that crossing it required playing. Neville looked at the configuration. He'd played chess since he was 4. His grandmother had insisted, for reasons she'd never explained to Neville, that Harry suspected had something to do with strategic thinking being a survival skill. Neville looked at the board the way he looked at a potions problem when he trusted himself, with focus and without panic. "I've got this," he said. Harry looked at him. "Yes, you do." Neville went to the board. He looked at it for 2 full minutes without moving, which was exactly right. The worst thing you could do against a board like this was move prematurely. Then he said, quietly, "Knight to e5. The piece moved. The game that followed was 7 minutes. Harry and Hermione watched from the edge as Neville dismantled the opposing setup with a precision that was methodical and slightly merciless, and the white pieces fell one by one, and the path across the board opened, and finally the Black King looked at its position from 3 different angles of impossible threat and tipped over with a sound like a small avalanche. The path was clear. Neville stood up from the White Queen square where he directed the game and turned back to them with the expression of someone who has just discovered, for the first time, that they are very good at something. "That was brilliant," Hermione said, with the precise directness of a compliment from someone who doesn't give them easily. Neville looked at her. Then at Harry. Something had settled in him, not pride exactly, but the quiet bedrock of a person who has just gained a piece of themselves. "The knight to e5 opening forces the response," he said, slightly distracted. "Once you have that response you've got 3 clear lines to." He stopped. "Sorry. Don't apologize for being right," Harry said. "Come on." The troll was unconscious in the 4th chamber, which meant Quirrell had taken care of it, his own dark magic overcoming someone else's protection. Harry walked around it with mild interest in its sheer physical scale and kept moving. The 5th chamber was fire. Blue and black flames blocked the entrance, purple flames blocked the exit, both magical, both requiring a logic solution that Hermione had already worked out from Snape's notes. She'd found the relevant potion theory months ago when she'd been cross-referencing the protection sequence, and she pulled the paper from her pocket now and looked at the bottles lined up on the table with their characteristic colors and sizes. She looked at the bottles for 40 seconds. This one, and this one," she said, pointing at 3 of them in sequence, forward bottle, and a different one for the journey back. She looked at Harry. "I want to be the one who does this. I worked it out." "Yes," Harry said, because that was obviously right. She picked up the forward bottle, considered it briefly, and drank. Harry and Neville watched her walk through the purple flames with her arms at her sides and her chin up, and she was through and unharmed and turned back to them from the other side with the calm face of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. Harry drank the 2nd bottle. Cold through his chest, not ice but something more like clarity. He stepped through the blue flames. They registered him and let him pass without comment. Neville drank the last forward bottle and came through. The 6th chamber. Harry stopped at the entrance to it and felt what was ahead of him. The cold wrong of Voldemort was strong now, not faint background noise but present and directed and aware. It had detected the approach, or Quirrell had, and the quality of it had changed from the hunting focus of someone engaged with a task to something sharper and more reactive. He turned to Hermione and Neville. "This part is mine." Hermione started to say something. "Not because I don't trust you," Harry said. "Because what's in that room responds specifically to me, and putting more people in that equation complicates it in ways that create risk for you rather than reducing risk for him." He looked at them both steadily. "I need you here. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, go get Dumbledore." "Not before 20 minutes." "Why not before?" Neville said. "Because 20 minutes is enough time to finish this, and Dumbledore arriving before it's finished changes the variables in ways I don't want." He held Neville's gaze. "Trust me." Neville nodded. Not easily, but genuinely. Hermione's jaw was tight and her eyes were doing the bright intense thing they did when she was managing strong feelings with imperfect success. She nodded once, sharply. Harry looked at Fawkes. The Phoenix held his gaze with those amber eyes, and Harry felt the bond between them, warm and complete and entirely mutual, the most uncomplicated relationship he had. Then he walked through the door. The final chamber held the mirror of Eriste. It had been moved here. Harry had known Dumbledore would move it, had known the mirror was the last trap, the cleverest one, the lock that required a specific key that only someone who wanted the stone but not for personal use could turn. He understood immediately how it worked. You looked in the mirror wanting to find the stone rather than use it, and the mirror gave it to you, and if you wanted to use it the stone stayed out of reach. Dumbledore's best work, really. Almost elegant. Quirrell was in front of the mirror. He was speaking to it in a low, urgent voice, the stammer entirely gone now. The stammer was a costume. Harry had always known that, a performance for the castle population, and here in the dark with no audience it had been dropped. His face was pale and tightly focused, the face of a man under enormous pressure from multiple directions, and his hands were pressing against the mirror's frame as if he could force it to give him what he wanted. "Tell me how. Show me." "I know it's there, I know, Professor Quirrell," Harry said. Quirrell spun around. In the split second before Quirrell's composure reassembled, Harry saw all of it, the fear, the exhaustion, the particular quality of a person who has been carrying something they can't put down for so long that they've forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. And underneath all of that, pressing through, the cold focused intelligence of what was living behind the turban. "Potter," Quirrell said. And then the voice that wasn't his said, at the same moment, with a different quality entirely, "Harry Potter." Two voices from one body. The dissonance of it was palpable. "You shouldn't be here," Quirrell said, falling back on his performance from instinct. "Neither should you," Harry said pleasantly. He looked at the mirror. Then at Quirrell. "How long has he been in your head?" A pause. The struggle across Quirrell's face was brief and the wrong thing won. "Long enough," said the voice that wasn't his. "Step away from the mirror," Harry said. "I don't think," Quirrell said, and his wand came up fast and professional, "whatever else he was, he'd been a competent wizard before all this, that you're in a position to give orders." The spell he fired was a binding curse, fast and green-edged, and Harry stepped aside from it with the fluid ease of someone who'd been practicing evasion since he was 9, moving just enough, no more, and the curse hit the wall behind him and the stone cracked. "You don't want to fight me," Harry said. "He does. You're tired." "Silencio," Quirrell said, and this one Harry deflected with his wand, the magic redirected into the floor, and the chamber absorbed it with a shudder. "Think about it," Harry said, and he was moving now, steady unhurried lateral movement that kept the distance between them constant. "You went looking for him. You thought you could control him. You're clever, Quirrell, you went to Albania alone, you thought you could come back with something useful and use it on your own terms." He watched Quirrell's face. "That's not what happened." The face did something involuntary. The truth of it landing. "Enough." The voice from behind the turban was cold and precise. "Remove the turban, Quirinus." Quirrell's hands went to the turban. They were shaking. Not from cold. From the specific trembling of a body doing something it doesn't want to do under the compulsion of a will not its own. He unwound the turban. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was wrong in the way things touched by dark magic that has gone too far are wrong, not monstrous, which would have been almost easier, but almost human, almost the memory of a face, a thing that had once been a person and had made choices that had taken it further and further from that original thing until what was left was a kind of brilliant, terrible hunger. "Harry Potter," said Voldemort, with the specific relish of something that has been waiting for this moment through years and death and the indignity of requiring another person's skull as a home. At last. Harry looked at Voldemort's face, the slit nostrils, the flat red eyes, the thing it wore instead of an expression, and felt nothing that resembled fear. He felt, instead, the clarity that comes when something you've been thinking about abstractly becomes concrete. The board was real. The game was real. This was the actual thing, not a proxy, not preparation. He felt the cold bright thing in his chest burning steadily. "I expected you to be further along by now," Harry said. Voldemort's red eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon." 10 years, Harry said. 10 years of being disembodied, searching, reduced to this. He gestured at Quirrell with something approaching sympathy for Quirrell, and you're still chasing an external solution. The stone. He looked at the mirror. "You haven't understood what happened to you." "I understand perfectly what happened to me," Voldemort said, and his voice was the kind of quiet that functions as a threat. "You were destroyed by love," Harry said. "Not a spell. Not a counter-curse. Love. A woman's choice to die for her child. And you've spent 10 years treating that as an obstacle to route around rather than the thing that actually beat you, because understanding it would require admitting that there are kinds of power you don't have and cannot take and cannot bind. He tilted his head. The stone won't fix that. Even if you get it. You'll rebuild a body and the same thing will be true. Philosophical discussions, Voldemort said, from a child. I'm not philosophizing, Harry said. I'm telling you the actual problem because I'd rather you understood it than not. It doesn't change what happens next. What happens next, Voldemort said, is that you give me the stone. You looked in the mirror, Potter. You looked and it gave you the stone, I can see it in your pocket. Harry reached into his pocket and his hand closed around something hard and warm. He hadn't looked in the mirror, he'd walked into the room already knowing he didn't want the stone for himself, which meant the mirror had given it to him the moment he walked through the door, the lock turning for the right key. He'd felt it happen. He'd been waiting for it. He held the stone in his hand, not bringing it out yet, just feeling its weight. It was smaller than he'd expected. It was warm. Give it to me, Voldemort said, and now the voice had the quality of enormous force barely restrained, the kind of power that has been compressed by years of constraint and is looking for any direction to expand. Give it to me and I'll let you live. I'll do more, I'll tell you what I know. I know things, Potter, things about your parents, about what really happened that night, that no one has told you. I know what happened that night, Harry said. My mother loved me. She died for it. You tried to kill me and the love destroyed you. That's what happened. There are details, there are always details, Harry said. People like you always have details. But the details don't change the thing. He looked at the stone in his hand. Then he looked at Fawkes, who had entered the chamber silently behind him and was hovering now at ceiling height, his wings spread, the amber light of him filling the upper spaces of the room. Here's what I'm going to do, Harry said to Voldemort. His voice was entirely even. I'm going to destroy the stone. Because you're right that Flamel's immortality isn't the point, Flamel understood that eventually, he'll understand it again, and because as long as this stone exists you'll pursue it, and every person between you and it will be Quirrell. He glanced at the professor. I won't be responsible for the next Quirrell. You won't, Voldemort's voice cracked, the composure breaking. That is not yours too, everything in this room right now, Harry said, is mine to decide. He pressed the stone between his palms. The thing he'd felt in his chest since his 6th birthday, the coal-bright thing that had blazed up when Fawkes burned away 31 bindings, the base frequency, the something older and underneath, he reached for it fully. Not carefully, not testing its edges. Fully, for the first time. It came the way that things come when you've been holding them back long enough, not slowly but all at once, like a door opening that has been under enormous pressure, the full weight of it moving through him from the chest outward into his hands, and his hands went from warm to hot to the temperature of something that is not temperature at all but is the magic equivalent of it, and the stone between his palms began to glow. Not the red glow of the stone itself. The amber white of phoenix fire. Voldemort made a sound. It was not a composed sound. You can't, it's indestructible, the only thing that could unmake it would be, phoenix fire, Harry said. I know. Fawkes sang above them, not the quiet conversational notes of daily life but a full phrase, open and enormous, the kind of sound that occupies all the space available and then makes more, the sound of something that has been singing since before human memory and knows every register of fire and knows this one best. The stone unmade itself. Not violently. Not with an explosion or a crack. It came apart the way a knot comes apart when the right thread is pulled, quickly, completely, with the quality of something that has reached its proper end. The warmth in Harry's hands spiked once, bright as noon, and then faded, and when he opened his palms there was a fine red dust that the air currents in the chamber dispersed before he could look at it properly. Gone. Voldemort's sound became something different. Not rage, something under rage, something more fundamental, the response of a consciousness that has survived by acquiring and has just watched the latest acquisition become impossible. You have no idea, the voice was breaking at the edges. What you've just, the consequences, you'll keep trying, Harry said. I know that. You'll find another way to reconstruct a body, and eventually you will, and that's a problem for future me. He looked at Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head with something that wasn't pity and wasn't contempt and wasn't anything simple. But it won't be this. Not the stone. I will kill you, Voldemort said, and the voice was cold again, had regained its cold, and underneath the cold was something that had the specific quality of a promise from someone who is very good at keeping promises. When I return. When I have a body again. I will come for you. I know, Harry said. I'll be here. Quirrell's hands came up, driven by Voldemort's will, scrabbling for Harry's arms, trying to get the direct contact that Voldemort had decided was the last remaining option. His hands closed around Harry's wrist. And then he screamed. Not Harry. Quirrell. The contact hit Quirrell like an electrical current through water, and the scream was immediate and involuntary and terrible, and his hands recoiled but came back, driven, trying again, and each time they touched Harry's skin the burn was instantaneous and total, the same principle that had killed Voldemort's body in the first place amplified and focused, his mother's love, not faded in 10 years, not diluted by time, alive in Harry's blood and his magic and his bones because love sacrificed. Doesn't diminish, it becomes structural. Harry grabbed Quirrell's wrists. He did it deliberately, which was the difference. Not to hurt him, to hold him still. Stop fighting, he said to Quirrell specifically, not to Voldemort. It's done. It's over. Quirrell looked at him with an expression that had too many things in it to name, and the screaming had stopped but the trembling hadn't, and somewhere behind his eyes the foreign consciousness was shrieking in a frequency that wasn't sound and was pulling away, trying to detach, trying to find an exit. Fawkes descended. He came down from the ceiling and landed on Quirrell's shoulder with a single precise movement, and he sang one note, sustained and clear, and the note went through the chamber like a key through a lock, and the cold wrong quality, the dissonant note pressed against the chord of everything, began to come apart. Not destroyed. Not killed in any conventional sense. Driven out. Expelled from the host by the sheer incompatibility of what a phoenix is with what Voldemort was, the same principle as flame and the shadow that had lived in Quirrell's skull tore free with a sound that none of them would be able to describe afterward and rushed through the chamber in a cold dark gust and hit the wall and dispersed. Gone. The silence afterward was the deepest silence Harry had heard since his birthday. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, which was instinct rather than strategy, and lowered him to the floor. Quirrell was conscious, barely, his face gray-white and his breathing shallow and his eyes moving with the unfocused quality of someone whose anchor has just been violently removed. He looked up at Harry with the specific disorientation of a man who has been two people for a long time and is now, abruptly and completely, one. The stone, Quirrell said, and his voice was entirely his own, the stammer was back, the real one, the one that had existed before Albania. Is it, gone? Harry said. Destroyed. Something moved through Quirrell's face. Complex and involuntary and not entirely negative. He's gone. Quirrell said. For now, Harry said honestly. Not forever. But from you. Yes. Quirrell closed his eyes. He was going to need a great deal of help, Madame Pomfrey first, then other kinds. Harry looked at him and thought about the difference between complicity and coercion, and about the specific terror of having something in your head that isn't you and having no way out. I'm going to get help, Harry said. Hang on. He stood up. He looked at the mirror of Eriste, now empty, showing only the room. He looked at the door. He looked at Fawkes, who had moved back to his shoulder, warm and steady. That went well, Harry said. Fawkes's response was a short sound that might have been agreement or might have been the Phoenix equivalent of you could have been slightly less dramatic about the stone. I was exactly dramatic enough, Harry said, and went to get Hermione and Neville. He found them outside the flames chamber where he'd left them. Neville was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and Trevor in his hands. Hermione was standing, which told Harry she'd been pacing before he appeared. Both of them looked at his face when he came through the door, and what they saw there seemed to answer the most important question without him having to say it. "It's done," he said. Neville let out a breath that had been waiting since 2 in the morning. Hermione's expression went through 3 distinct phases: relief, then the delayed onset of the fear she'd been managing, then the settling into the present, each phase visible because for once she wasn't trying to contain them. "Quirrell," she said. "Alive. He needs help. I need one of you to go up and get Dumbledore while I stay with him." "I'll go," Neville said immediately, and he was on his feet and moving with the decisiveness of someone who has found their footing and is using it. Hermione followed Harry back through the flames, through the chess chamber, through the devil's snare, through the keys room, all the way back to the final chamber where Quirrell lay on the stone floor in the amber glow of Fawkes's presence. She knelt beside him without being asked and checked his pulse and his breathing with the practical care of someone who has read every Hogwarts medical guide available to first years. "He's stable," she said. "Weak but stable." "Yes," Harry said. She looked around the chamber, the empty mirror, the stone floor, the place where the stone had been destroyed. She looked at Harry. "You destroyed the Philosopher's Stone," she said. "Yes. The only existing one. The one that could have cured every disease and provided unlimited gold and, yes," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not going to explain why?" "You already know why," Harry said. She thought about it. Looked at the mirror. Looked at Quirrell. Looked at Harry, who was standing in the middle of all of this with Fawkes on his shoulder and his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of someone who has done exactly what they came to do. "Because as long as it existed," she said slowly, "it was a target. And every target draws people through whatever's protecting it." "Yes," Harry said. "And the people who go through protections after something like that aren't people you want getting through. Generally, no. And Flamel has lived long enough," Hermione said. "He said so himself, in his letter to Dumbledore. I found that letter referenced in Dumbledore's notes from the archive. I wasn't entirely supposed to have those, but the castle," she paused, "the castle gave me access, didn't it?" "Yes," Harry said. "She absorbed this. The castle likes you." "It likes us," Harry said. She looked at him again, and the expression that had been sitting in the background of her face since September, the one she hadn't named, the quiet fierce one, came to the front. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Harry nodded slightly, acknowledging it without making it complicated, and turned back to Quirrell. Above them, Fawkes burned his quiet constant amber and waited for morning. Chapter 6, What Remains After Fire. Dumbledore came down through the trap door at 3:47 in the morning. Harry heard him before he saw him, not footsteps. The old man moved too quietly for footsteps, but the change in the quality of the air, the way the castle's hum shifted slightly when Dumbledore moved through it, the way everything in a room reorganizes itself subtly around a very large gravitational presence. He came through the final door and stopped. He looked at Quirrell on the floor. At Hermione kneeling beside him with 2 fingers on his pulse. At the mirror of Eriste showing nothing. At Harry standing in the middle of it with Fawkes. He looked for a long time without saying anything. "The stone," he said finally. "Destroyed," Harry said. Another pause. Longer than the first. "Voldemort?" "Gone from Quirrell. Dispersed." "Not destroyed. I don't think dispersal is destruction, for something like him. But gone, for now." Dumbledore crossed the room and knelt beside Quirrell, and his examination was quick and thorough, and his hands as he checked the man's condition were careful in a way that carried its own kind of information, not the efficiency of a man checking whether an asset was salvageable, but the care of someone who felt genuine responsibility for how this particular person had arrived at this particular floor. "He needs St. Mungo's," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. Dumbledore looked up at Harry over the half-moon glasses. His face in the wand light was the face Harry had seen in the abandoned astronomy tower, not the performed version, the real one, older and more tired and more complicated. "You destroyed the stone," he said. "I did. Nicholas will, I'll need to tell Nicholas, I imagine he'll understand," Harry said. "From everything I've read about him, he's been thinking about it for a while." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not the productive quiet of their earlier conversations but something more interior, a man turning something over. "You planned this from the beginning of term," he said. "The stone. Quirrell. All of it." "From before term," Harry said. "I told you in August. My terms." "You did." Dumbledore looked at the mirror. "I put it here expecting you to find it. Expecting the encounter with Voldemort to happen here, where I'd set the terms." He paused. "You found it on your own schedule instead." "Yes," Harry said. "And the terms," Dumbledore said, carefully, "ended up being yours regardless." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, 11 years old, standing in the deepest room of his carefully constructed trap with a phoenix on his shoulder and a look of absolute unconcerned clarity, and something happened in the old man's face that was not quite any single emotion. It was the expression of someone who has held a belief for a very long time and has just watched reality insist, gently and completely, on something different. "Your mother," Dumbledore said, "would have done exactly the same thing. The planning, the precision, the complete refusal to be positioned by anyone." He stopped. "And your father would have made significantly more noise about it." "I know," Harry said. "I've been told." Dumbledore stood. He was quiet for another moment, and then he said, "Harry. I owe you an apology." Harry looked at him. He'd been expecting this, not the precise moment, but the arrival of it. He'd known it was coming the way you know a storm is coming from the change in air pressure, and he'd thought about what he wanted when it arrived. Not satisfaction, he'd established that much. Not vindication, which was just satisfaction with better posture. Something more specific and more practical. "Save it for when I'm not standing in an underground chamber with an unconscious man," Harry said. "I'd rather have it somewhere worth having it." Dumbledore looked at him. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "Quite right." He conjured a stretcher for Quirrell with the ease of someone for whom difficult magic is simply the vocabulary of daily life, and looked at Hermione. "Miss Granger. Would you assist?" She stood and took one end without drama, and Dumbledore took the other, and they moved toward the door. Dumbledore paused at the threshold and looked back at Harry. "Coming?" "In a minute," Harry said. Dumbledore nodded and went through. Harry stood alone in the final chamber. The mirror of Eriste in front of him, reflecting the room, the wand light, the amber glow of Fawkes, and Harry himself, just himself, no additional figures, because the stone was gone and the mirror had nothing to give him, and whatever desire it had shown him before, it apparently assessed his current state as sufficiently complete for its purposes. He looked at his own reflection for a moment. Black hair, round glasses, his mother's eyes, the scar. A boy who had been made very small and had become something else and was standing in the room where a piece of that becoming had just resolved. "Right," he said to his reflection. Then he turned around and walked out. The hospital wing in the early morning was the quietest place in Hogwarts. Madame Pomfrey received Quirrell with the focused urgency of a woman who considered her ward's condition a personal insult when it was anything other than stable, and she had him assessed and attended to with a speed that impressed even Harry, and then she turned on the 3 first years with the expression of someone about to deliver an extensive and justified lecture. "In bed," she said. "All 3 of you. Now." "We're not hurt," Hermione said. "In bed," Pomfrey repeated, with the quality of someone for whom this sentence has only ever had one possible response. They got into beds. Harry sat up rather than lying down, and Pomfrey looked at him for a moment and decided this was the battle she was choosing not to fight, because she had other things to be getting on with. Neville fell asleep within minutes, which said something about either the depth of his calm or the thoroughness of his exhaustion. Probably both. He'd been wound tight since dinner, and the unwinding, now that the thing was done, was complete and immediate. Harry watched him sleep and felt something warm about it. Hermione didn't sleep. She sat up in her bed with her knees against her chest and her eyes moving across the ceiling in the specific pattern of someone running calculations. "Ask," Harry said. "What happens to Quirrell?" "St. Mungo's. Evaluation, treatment, probably a significant investigation by the ministry. He'll need help, the real kind, mind healers. Whether he gets it depends on people I don't control." He paused. "I'll make sure Dumbledore understands it matters." "Do you think he'll recover?" "I think he lost something that's very difficult to recover from," Harry said honestly. "But he was a person before Albania, and he has the potential to be one again. Whether he chooses it is his." Hermione absorbed this. "And Voldemort? He's dispersed. Not gone." "Not gone," Harry agreed. "He'll spend the next however many years finding another way back. He found a way back once. He'll find another. It won't be next year. Might not be for several years." He looked at the ceiling. "But yes. Eventually. And you're not worried?" Harry said. "Not exactly. It's on the list. There are things between now and then." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew what you were walking into tonight. You'd planned for every piece of it." "Most pieces," Harry said. "I didn't know Fawkes would be the thing that expelled him from Quirrell. I thought I'd have to do something more direct." "What would more direct have looked like?" He thought about it. "Probably more dramatic," he said. She almost laughed, which turned into the sound of someone trying not to, which was better. "Hermione," Harry said. "Yes. You did well tonight. The potion logic, the flames, you did that perfectly." She looked at him. The bright fierce expression was there without the quiet that usually kept it managed. "You knew I would," she said. "Yes," he said. "But I wanted to say it anyway." She looked at the ceiling again, but the set of her face had changed, become slightly less architectural. "Neville too," Harry added, toward the sleeping shape in the next bed. "He can't hear you," Hermione said. "That's all right," Harry said. "I'll tell him when he's awake." He lay back finally. Fawkes settled on the headboard above him, folding in with the precision of a creature that can find stillness anywhere. The hospital wing was pale and clean in the early morning light beginning to come through the high windows, and somewhere in it Quirrell breathed steadily on his restricted cot, and Harry closed his eyes. He slept. He woke to Dumbledore sitting in the chair beside his bed. Not performing being in the chair, actually in it, elbows on knees, hands folded, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has been sitting with a specific thought for a while and is still not done with it. Harry looked at him. Looked at the window, mid-morning, the light particular and clear. Neville's bed was empty. Hermione's was empty, which meant they'd been up for a while and had the grace to leave this. "You slept 4 hours, Dumbledore said, without looking up immediately." "That's enough," Harry said, and sat up. Dumbledore looked at him then. "How do you feel?" "Fine," Harry said, and it was true. Not the false fine of someone dismissing the question, just an accurate report on his current state. "You said you had an apology." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I've been rehearsing it," he said. "How's it going?" "Poorly," Dumbledore said, and the word carried the specific weight of someone who is very articulate acknowledging that articulation is failing them. "Everything I find to say sounds like a justification wearing the clothes of an apology." "Then don't justify," Harry said. "It's more difficult than it sounds," Dumbledore said. "The impulse to explaining is fine," Harry said. "Explaining and apologizing are different things. You can do both. Just don't do one when you mean the other." Dumbledore looked at him. "You are," he said, 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. I keep finding myself surprised by that. Which is absurd, given that I know how old you are, and given that the alternative explanations for your current self are far more absurd. He unfolded his hands and folded them differently. I placed 31 bindings on a child who could not consent to them. Some of those bindings were protective. 11 of them were designed to make you manageable rather than safe, to shape you into a version of yourself that would require guidance and would defer to the people I'd positioned as your guides. He stopped. That is not protection. That is something else. And I told myself it was necessary, and I told myself that necessity justified it, and Fawkes left me in the middle of the night because Fawkes cannot stay with something that has stopped asking whether the justification is real. Harry sat with this. The quality of it, the absence of performance, the straightforward naming of the thing. He'd thought about this conversation for 4 years, and in his versions of it the apology had been more defensive, more layered with the architecture of a man who'd spent a lifetime being the most important person in the room. This was quieter than his imagined version. More honest. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Okay, he repeated. I mean it, Harry said. Not that it didn't matter. It did. But you just said what it actually was without dressing it up, and that's what I wanted. The rest, he paused, picking the word. The rest is already ash. I burned it the night of my birthday and I've been building something else in the space. Something rather impressive, Dumbledore said softly. Mine, Harry said. That's the important part. It's mine. Dumbledore was quiet for a while. The hospital wing moved around them in its morning rhythms, a door somewhere, Pomfrey's footsteps at the other end of the ward. What do you need from me? Dumbledore said eventually. Going forward. What would actually be useful rather than what I'd decide was useful? Harry had thought about this too. Honesty, he said. When you know something relevant to my situation, tell me. Not the edited version designed to produce the response you want. The actual thing. He paused. And when you don't know something, say so. I've found that people who always have answers are generally editing out the ones that make them look uncertain. You're describing my primary professional habit, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. Another pause. The prophecy, Dumbledore said. Tell me. Dumbledore told him. All of it, the full text, the circumstances of its making, the reason 2 families had been in danger, the reason one had been chosen. He told it plainly, without softening the language or adjusting the emphasis, and Harry listened to it in the same way he'd listened to everything this year, fully present, taking it in without performing a reaction, letting it settle into the real shape of things rather than the shape he might have preferred. When it was done, Harry thought for a moment. Then, the power the Dark Lord knows not. Yes, Dumbledore said. You thought that was something I needed to be guided toward. Shaped toward. The right kind of love, carefully cultivated, pointed in the right direction. Yes, Dumbledore said. It was already there, Harry said. It was always already there. That's what you bound up. Not just power, the thing the prophecy was talking about. You were afraid of it being uncontrolled, so you controlled it, and in controlling it you almost destroyed the prophecy's own mechanism. He looked at the old man with something that was curiosity more than anger. Did you ever see the irony? Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Not until Fawkes left, he said. When Fawkes left I sat in my office and I saw it very clearly for approximately 1 very long hour. And then I began trying to work out how to address it. And your conclusion was 31 letters through the post slot, Harry said. My conclusion, Dumbledore said, and now the wryness was back, the real kind, was that the boy had several years head start on any approach I made, and that any attempt at management was going to be received the way it deserved. He looked at Harry. I was not wrong about that. Harry almost smiled. No. You weren't. The chair creaked as Dumbledore shifted. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that wasn't in any of Harry's rehearsed versions of this conversation. I am sorry about your parents. Not in the sense that I could have prevented it, the prophecy would have moved regardless, the danger was real, and your father and mother made their choices with clear eyes. But I am sorry that you grew up without them. I am sorry that I chose the solution I did rather than fighting harder for a different one. He paused. I don't know that I would find a better solution if I went back. But I should have looked harder. Harry held this. It sat differently from the rest of it, heavier, more personal, touching something that was still raw in the specific way that old wounds are raw when you've been careful with them but haven't let them heal completely. He didn't try to dismiss it or wrap it up quickly. Thank you, he said, and meant it simply. Dumbledore nodded once. What happens now is yours to direct, he said. I will not stop having opinions. I will not stop caring what happens to you or to the wider situation. But the choices, he seemed to be choosing the words carefully, checking each one, the choices are yours. Yes, Harry said. They are. It wasn't a concession Dumbledore gave easily. Harry could see the effort of it, could see the decades of habit and certainty and genuine care that had become control pressing against the simple sentence. But it was genuine. And that, Harry thought, was the most that could reasonably be expected from an old man dismantling in a single morning's conversation something he'd been building for 60 years. One more thing, Harry said. Yes. Quirrell. He needs proper care. Mind healers, not just a medical evaluation. Make sure that happens. Dumbledore looked at him. He tried to kill you. Voldemort tried to kill me, Harry said. Quirrell was a man who made a catastrophically bad choice and paid for it in a way I wouldn't wish on most people. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Make sure he gets help. A long pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. I will. The end-of-year feast was 3 days later and the Great Hall was back to its full population, students returned from holiday, and the noise of 500 people settling in for a celebratory dinner crashed over Harry like a warm wave. He sat between Neville and Hermione. Ron was on Neville's other side, having returned to find out what he'd missed and been given a summary that had made his eyes go very round. He'd spent the better part of 2 days saying, "You actually destroyed the stone," at intervals, apparently finding that the reality of it kept not quite fitting into his head. "You actually destroyed the stone," he said now, as the food appeared. "Ron," Neville said. I know. We know," Hermione said. "Eat something." The feast was excellent in the way Hogwarts feasts were excellent, enormous and varied and warm, the castle performing its best self, the enchanted ceiling showing a clear winter night full of more stars than England usually allowed. Harry ate and talked and listened to Percy Weasley recounting something at the top of the table with the dedicated enthusiasm of a boy who treats every anecdote as a formal report, and to Fred and George 2 tables away apparently making bets about something that involved a bread roll, and to Hermione telling Neville about something she'd found in the restricted section that he was going to find interesting, and all of it was good. All of it was real and present and good. At the head table, Dumbledore rose and made his end-of-year remarks with the elaborate casualness of a man who is having the most complicated internal year of his professional life and has decided not to show it in public. He awarded house points, Gryffindor 1, on the strength of several end-of-year contributions, and he was warm and precise and said nothing publicly about the events of the previous week beyond a quiet reference to courage and friendship that Harry understood the subtext of. When the announcement of house points reached Hermione's contribution, specifically the countercharm and the logic puzzle of the flames, Hermione went slightly pink, which was extremely out of character and therefore extremely endearing. Harry did not comment on this because he had good instincts about when not to comment on things. Neville said, "Well done," in the direct uncomplicated way he said things he meant, and Hermione's pink deepened briefly and then she went back to being composed. When Neville's chess game was mentioned, Ron made a sound of complete vindication and said, "I told you, you're brilliant at chess," with a warmth that was entirely unself-conscious, and Neville looked at his plate and said, "It was just the knight to e5 opening," and Ron said, "It was a 3-move checkmate on a living chess set." Neville, that's not just anything. Neville looked up at that. It was 7 moves actually. 7 moves against pieces that were trying to actively stop you, Ron said. Mental. Neville smiled, not the small careful smile he'd been using all year but a full one, surprised out of him, and it changed his whole face. Harry watched this and said nothing and felt extremely satisfied. After dinner the common room was loud and cheerful and someone had gotten hold of a WWW catalog which didn't yet exist as a business but was apparently an early prototype that Fred and George were testing responses to, and there was a good-natured argument about whether a particular product was practical or absolutely impractical that went on for 40 minutes and was one of the best conversations Harry had been in all year. He sat in the fat armchair by the fire late in the evening when the common room had thinned out, just the lingerers and the people who weren't ready to sleep yet, and Fawkes was on the armrest and Harry was thinking about the year in the way you think about something that has ended, not with nostalgia because it wasn't far enough gone for that, just with the quality of attention you give to something while you still have it, before it becomes memory. Neville appeared and took the chair across from him and sat in the particular way he sat when he was going to say something he'd been working up to. I wanted to say, he started. Then stopped. I've been trying to work out how to say this since the night in the underground chambers. Take your time, Harry said. Neville looked at the fire. Before I knew you. Before the library and all of it. I thought, he chose the words carefully, I thought being magical but not very good at it was just who I was. That was the whole thing. That was the permanent situation. He paused. My gran never said I was rubbish. She was just, always slightly disappointed, I think. Because she expected me to be like my dad, and I wasn't, and I didn't know how to be what she expected, and after enough time he stopped. You start becoming the disappointed version of yourself. The one that other people see. Harry was quiet. You never looked at me like that, Neville said. From the first day in the library. You asked me questions like the answers would be interesting, and they were, and you kept doing it, and I don't, he looked at Harry. I don't know how to thank you for that. Harry thought about this. Not performing consideration, actually thinking, because Neville had said something that deserved a real answer. You were already what you are, Harry said. I didn't make anything. I could see it. Anyone who bothered to look could see it. He met Neville's eyes. Your grandmother loves you. She's also been doing what people do when they're frightened, trying to make you into something that would be safe. Something recognizable. It's not different from what Dumbledore did to me, at the bottom of it. People afraid of what might happen try to control the shape of things. He paused. You were always going to be exactly who you are. I'm glad I got to see it. Neville looked at him for a long time. Something had settled in his face, not resolved exactly, more like accepted. I think, he said slowly, my gran is going to be surprised when I come home. Good, Harry said. Neville almost smiled. Then he did smile. Yeah, he said. Good. The fire crackled. Trevor emerged from Neville's pocket and settled on the armrest in a manner suggesting he considered himself part of the conversation, and Fawkes regarded the toad with the philosophical tolerance of a very ancient creature for very small ones. Hermione appeared behind them from the direction of the girls' dormitory stairs. She had a book. This was non-optional for Hermione. A book was as much a part of her basic equipment as her wand, and she sat on the arm of the sofa near Harry's chair and opened it, and said, without looking up, I've been reading about Phoenix bonds. Oh. Harry said. They're documented but rare. The last one on record before yours was in the 1400s. A witch named Elara Voss. She turned a page. The bond doesn't just convey protection. The documentation is patchy, but the general consensus is that a Phoenix bond is self-reinforcing. As the witch or wizard grows, the bond deepens. As the bond deepens, the access to whatever the underlying magic is, the base frequency, she looked up, and her eyes were bright with the particular brightness of someone who has found something that matters. It grows with you. Yes, Harry said. Did you know that? I suspected, Harry said. I've been feeling it all year. She looked at him with that expression, the quiet fierce one. The 31 bindings. If they'd stayed, I'd be a different person, Harry said. Smaller. More manageable. Probably braver in the narrow sense, because the version of me they were making would have needed courage as a substitute for capability. He looked at the fire. But this is better. Yes, Hermione said. Obviously. She looked back at her book. Neville had picked up his copy of Magical Creatures and Their Properties, which he kept in his robe pocket because he was the kind of person who kept books in his robe pocket, and this was entirely correct. The fire burned. The common room settled into its late-night quiet. What happens next year? Neville said, after a while. Not anxiously. Just with the forward-looking interest of someone who has found that having a future is an interesting thing. Voldemort keeps looking for a way back, Harry said. Dumbledore and I have an actual working arrangement instead of a management structure. We learn more things. He paused. Hermione finds several more restricted section books. I have a list, Hermione said, without looking up. I know, Harry said. You've seen my list. No. But you have a list. She turned a page. I have several lists. There we go, Harry said. Neville's smile was fully out now, the real one, sitting easily on his face without any of the earlier effort. Do you think it's going to be like this every year? He said. Something trying to either kill you or end the world? Harry considered this. Probably, he said. But we'll be better prepared each time. That's both reassuring and extremely concerning, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. That's about right. The train home was different from the train there. Same carriages, same route, same Scottish to London progression of landscape outside the windows. But the four of them, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Ron, filled the compartment differently now, the way people fill a space differently after shared experience, more comfortably, with less of the calibration that new acquaintance requires. Ron and Neville were deep in a chess conversation that had been running since breakfast. Hermione was writing, not homework, something more personal, her pen moving with the contained urgency of someone capturing thoughts before they disperse. Harry was at the window. The Scottish hills went past, then the border country, then the north of England. Fawkes was asleep on the luggage rack above him, which was the Phoenix equivalent of fully relaxed. It happened rarely and was its own kind of information. Harry watched the landscape and thought about the summer ahead, and about Privet Drive, which he was going to very briefly before the matters of a new school year began. He thought about Quirrell in St. Mungo's, which Dumbledore had confirmed that morning. He thought about the prophecy and its language, the power the Dark Lord knows not, and about the 31 spaces where bindings had been, all of them filled now with what had always been there underneath. He thought about his parents. Not with the quality of lack that had characterized thinking about them for the first years of his life, the fog-muffled sense of something missing without knowing clearly what. He thought about them with the specific feeling of people who were gone but were not absent, who lived in the choice Lily had made and in the laugh Harry had inherited from James and in the eyes that Hagrid had pointed out and Dumbledore had mentioned and Snape had looked away from that one time in potions when Harry had said something with a particular intonation and the professor's jaw had gone very tight. They were in him. That was the thing. The fog had been designed, in part, to prevent him from knowing that the source of his power wasn't external, wasn't a prophecy or a scar or a position on a board. It was them. What they had chosen. What that choosing had put into the grain of him. He pressed his palm flat against the window glass, which was cold and smooth, and felt nothing hum back. It was just glass, it wasn't the castle, there was no magic in it to respond. But the gesture was its own thing, the habit of connection, the reaching out that had started when he was 6 in a cupboard trying to feel the world through solid things. He kept his hand there for a moment anyway. Harry, Hermione said. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the clear direct expression she used for things she'd decided to say rather than things she was deciding whether to say. This year was, she started. Then stopped. Tried differently. You made this year, another stop. She looked mildly frustrated with herself, which was rare enough that it was interesting. I know, Harry said. I was going to finish the sentence. I know that too, Harry said. But you've been trying to finish it since the hospital wing and it keeps not coming out the way you want it to, so I thought I'd let you know the message arrived anyway. She looked at him. Then she looked back at her writing with an expression of extreme composure that was doing quite a lot of work. Right, she said, and her pen moved again, and the corner of her mouth had done something small. Neville glanced up from the chess conversation, caught the exchange, and looked at Harry with raised eyebrows. Harry shook his head very slightly. Neville turned back to Ron. The train moved south through the English afternoon. Fawkes breathed slowly overhead, warm amber even in sleep, and Harry turned back to the window and watched England arrive around him, the motorways and the housing estates and the service stations, the particular ordinariness of it that he'd grown up inside and which had always felt, before, like a container he couldn't see the top of. He could see the top of it now. He could see past it. He knew what he was and what he was for and who was beside him and what was coming, and none of it frightened him and all of it mattered, and that combination, clarity without fear, stakes without terror, was the specific quality of a person who has been freed from a cage and has no interest in building another one. King's Cross arrived. The train slowed. The platform appeared outside the window, crowded with Muggle commuters and parents waiting, and Harry stood up and took his trunk down and waited for the others. He was the last through the barrier. On the Muggle side he stopped, and the noise and the crowds and the particular smell of a mainline station washed over him, and somewhere behind him the barrier sealed itself back into appearing to be just a wall. Two worlds on either side of a solid surface. He'd lived in the smaller one for 10 years, not knowing the larger existed. Now he moved between them freely, and both were real, and neither one was everything. He shifted his trunk and looked for the Dursley car in the drop-off zone, and found it, and Vernon was behind the wheel looking at his newspaper with concentrated irrelevance, and Harry walked toward it. He was halfway across the concourse when he felt it. Not the cold wrong of Voldemort, that was gone, dispersed, nowhere near. Something different. The castle's hum wasn't here, the castle was 300 miles north, but there was something else, something in the ambient magic of the city, the trace-level magic that exists everywhere if you can feel it, that had briefly sharpened into attention. Like a signal in noise, suddenly clear. He stopped walking. He stood in the middle of King's Cross concourse with people moving around him in all directions and felt it, faint, distant, the quality of something that had noticed him the way things with long memories notice things that match patterns they stored a long time ago. Not hostile. Not imminent. Just, aware. Interested. Watching. It lasted 4 seconds. Then it dissolved back into the noise and the crowd and the ordinarily ambient, and Harry was just a boy standing in a train station with a trunk and a phoenix on his shoulder, and Vernon was in the drop-off zone, and the summer was ahead, and the year after that was ahead, and everything after that was ahead, and it was all his. He started walking again. Fawkes pressed warm against his shoulder and said one quiet phrase against his ear, not prediction, not warning, just the sustained simple note of a creature that will be there. I know, Harry said. Me too. He walked out of King's Cross into the London afternoon. Forward. Always forward.